Since he'd first become the priest of Quox, he'd never once been told there was an emergency to gather them all at once. Even when the Wise One had escaped, he alone had been contacted to deal with it due to being the only one in the village with his skill advancing beyond its limits. And when he stretched his memories to his youth before he'd taken over the role, he couldn't say it had happened before either. The fact spoke of an emergency of unprecedented levels as all 5 priests went not to the public statues where they'd usually speak, letting the other believers experience half of the conversation between the gods and their mortal voices, but instead to a private area away from stray ears as they looked nervously amongst themselves, wondering just what they were going to have to deal with. It was the god he represented, Quox, who spoke first, even if they could feel the presence of the other 4 within their minds, and the news he brought was a nightmare. He told them firmly, "Of course, my lord, we'll happily lay down our lives to protect the others," Toltho said confidently, noises of agreement coming from the others before they were all quickly silenced. The god spat out. He was stunned. In a situation like that, chaos would ensue. There were a few hundred of them that made up the village. Moving them all so quickly wouldn't be an easy feat no matter the situation. And to release all of the lesser ones without even keeping a breeding pair was unprecedented. It wasn't him who picked up on the most important part though, but Empa as she asked for clarification, more than ready to follow any order given. "Bodies, my lord? If they weren't fighting to protect the others and weren't confronting the enemy head-on, then what bodies could there be?" It was only Toltho, the sole member of the priests to harbor a hint of doubt in the gods. He served so devotedly that felt a pit form in his stomach as he got the answer as the god Harrow spoke up. The other gods spoke up, agreeing with the order as the other 4 priests were ready to get to it, seemingly indifferent to the idea that they'd be slaughtering their own kind so long as they could fulfill the will of the beings they loved so much. But Toltho only felt empty. The village was everyone he'd ever known, everyone he loved. He spent each day talking to them, helping them and growing with them, and he was being told to put them down like any other animal. He thought his god might say something, might speak up to the thoughts he was having, but got only the same hollow words as the rest, leaving him to deal with a single truth. Even though his god was powerful, could hear the thoughts in the deepest corners of his mind, he didn't care to. This was a task that was expected of him, and as far as they were concerned it would be carried out. Leaving the tent, the priest ran off to where the lesser ones were kept due to being the one with the highest taming level, while the rest gathered the villagers in the center of town. Word had spread that all of the priests had been gathered for a private meeting and worry came from it. For good or ill, they all knew something was happening. It was only as the final priest spoke up, the most fanatical of all, that they got to understand what happened to their collective shock and horror. "Rejoice, friends. The gods have seen fit to not only warn us of a coming threat, but to give many of you the chance to work for the good of us all. I only wish I could be so lucky to give my life for them, but it seems I won't be blessed with such a fate yet." It was as he spoke that it became clear that the news they were going to receive was far from as good as his devotion made it sound, with the sharper among them gaining a deep look of fear as they understood that they were going to be asked something life-threatening. "It seems the strange ones are coming, and in a force we cannot stop," Kes continued. "By now the lesser ones have been freed to slow them as best as we can, but that won't be enough, so our gods have given the order, as much as it hurts them so, that all who might slow us down must lay down their lives for the good of the rest. To so clearly be able to show your devotion, how I envy you all. It hurts them. Does it hurt them? I've always been told how deeply they love us, how deeply any harm coming to us harms them too. But does it really? Was the worry on their voices for us as they gave these orders?" The crowd was silent as they understood what they were being asked. They weren't being told to die fighting the strange ones, they were being told to die before that, to sacrifice themselves for the rest, and before Toltho could react to it, one of them did just that. A fellow hunter, he saw Old Man Zex in the crowd pull out the knife he'd always kept on his waist. Even after the injury to his leg kept him from hunting anymore. He'd helped teach Toltho all he knew of the art, was the one to get him to walk the path of stealth when he'd found that he had no skill for any magic but death, and was the one who gave him advice when he struggled with his faith in his own youth, helping him become the sort of man who would become one of the 5 priests. And before his eyes, while in the middle of the crowd, he dragged that knife across his throat after hearing one of the surest ways he could serve his gods. The people around him screamed, and Toltho did his best not to be sick then and there. He was no stranger to blood and death. The invisibility he had access to was more than enough to leave him as the village's most important hunter. But through it all the other priests didn't flinch, with Kaz almost reveling in it. Yes, he understood. He knew his own weakness and did what he had to truly serve the gods. But what of the rest of you? Of course, if you are strong and well, you need to live on to give your faith to maintain all we have. But how many of you are old, are sick, are injured, are children? Even Kaz seemed to hesitate there for only a brief second. His young daughter standing amongst the others, but just as likely to slow them down as they went, while Toltho stared at the rest. It looked like some were ready to act almost as quickly as Zex had, looking for something nearby to get the job done, as others looked on in fear. The elderly who wanted to live on, the injured who just needed time to heal, the parents who held their children tightly, not knowing what to do as the children cried, the boy and girl he'd spoken to just earlier among them, one so happily looking forward to the future, the other questioning the gods when she was too young to know better. And it was as he looked out to all of them that he made his choice, speaking up for the first time as he did. "No. What was that?" Kaz asked, not understanding what his fellow priest was saying as Toltho screamed out into the crowd. "I said no. Who are the gods to say that we should die for them? Who are they to say we should kill the ones we love before running away like cowards? Is our community so fragile? Are the bonds we share so weak? Could you all go on living with yourselves if you just let the lives of your parents and your young brothers and sisters, friends and neighbors end so easily? I say no. If the gods would ask this of us, then why do we even worship them? What's been the point of all of this?" The crowd was a mix of looks, a few seeming to agree but more looking shocked that a priest would say such a thing, while others looked enraged at him for daring to say something that would go against the will of the gods like that, with his fellow priests being in the latter group. "You go too far, Toltho," Plet screamed at him, a ball of fire already in his hand, before turning to the crowd. "Look at what we have. The gods gave it all to us. The food of the forest, the waters of the river, the sun in the sky, even our very lives. If they gave it all so freely, then who are we to say they can't take it away? Are you so great that you can decide what is right? You don't have to be great to know this is wrong," he yelled back. "And if the gods are wrong about this, then what else are they wrong about? I've seen the strange ones. They care for one another as any of us do. Maybe they are coming to kill us, but then what difference is it from now anyway? I'd rather die fighting than live with the consequences after." The voice of Quox screamed through his head. "Perhaps I am wrong for this, but in that case it's better to be wrong," he yelled back at the same time the other priests attacked. With how coordinated it was, he could only assume it was directed by the gods, as the four of them moved as one, two of them firing off flame spells towards him as the others used earth, leaving him little room to avoid as he had to decide what hit to take, choosing the weaker of the flame spells in the end as he felt his flesh sizzle and fur burn as he activated the one skill in the village that no others had managed. He brought forth his invisibility. As the awakened version of the stealth skill, turning it into a non-affinitied magic when it did, he was the only one in the village to achieve such a feat in its entire history, needing just what had happened explained to him as a result, but when he had, he couldn't have been more thrilled. He attributed it to the gods, and now it was going to be the only thing keeping him safe from their wrath. With the skill activated, he couldn't be seen, a similar effect to what some light spells could achieve, but as a skill descended from stealth, it could do so much more. It silenced his movements, helping to erase what noises he made, while at the same time reduced his impact on the world, though not completely erasing it. The steps he took in the dirt left almost non-existent traces, though they were there, and the smell of his body lessened enough that even his kind's sharp senses typically couldn't pick him up unless they were focusing on it and right by him. At least that would be how it usually was if the stench of his burning fur wasn't so strong. After slipping past their first attack, they had much more trouble aiming for the second without the aid of their eyes. But that didn't mean they'd miss, it just meant each attack had to be bigger. Instead of the controlled blasts of fire and earth, carefully made to conserve mana, they went wider, doing their best to strike the areas he could have gone to in the time that he vanished while he struggled with just what to do. He knew they would kill him, that was the clear aim of each spell. The only question was if he would respond in kind. He knew he couldn't just put them in a state where they'd be unable to fight. Among the 5 priests, he was the only one with access to death magic. But the rest of them were skilled at life and could use it masterfully to heal whatever wounds they received. But if I kill for my own convenience, am I any better? He couldn't help but ask as he made his choice. In the case of fire magic that was being shot to find him, increasing the spread of it lowered its power unless more mana was put into it, and Toltho was sure the 2 priests were trying to conserve what they had as they shot off their spells, so he went for them first. They were minding their backs as each followed him the best they could with their noses, so he took a risk. When one fired off her spell, he jumped through it as it started to clear, creating a clear image of where he was before she could fire off another for the others to lock in on as he used his powerful strength to slam her into the ground, knocking the air out of her as he did before he dodged the coming attacks, watching as she was caught in the crossfire. It looked like the others knew this could happen, so they'd held back. But they'd done him a service in the meantime. His one attack would have just stunned her, but they'd taken her out, at least while she worked to heal her wounds, and for just a second he thought he actually had a chance, right up until he'd heard the screams of children in the crowd, looking to it for the first time since his fight began and feeling horror grip him. There were a dozen bodies laying around as he struggled to understand what was happening. It seemed that more had chosen to take their lives as their gods commanded. But then there were the ones taking an active part among those who resisted. People were fighting for their lives, but worst of all was a small group of the particularly devout closing in on the parents trying to protect their young. No. He forgot about the other priests as he kicked off the ground and threw himself into the crowd, tossing those who would try to kill the children without any care for whatever injuries they sustained as he stood in front of them, waiting for someone else to make a move as a water mage stood up, filling the area with mist. For all the good it did him, his invisibility wasn't perfect, and as moisture filled the air he was able to be seen as a whole within it. A clear target both for the priests as well as the most devout among them as he fought, knowing that while he might die in the end, if enough people were injured the gods might have no choice but to change their plans, so he cancelled his invisibility, not seeing a point in wasting the mana as he clad his fists with death magic instead, taking a fighting stance as he prepared to give everything he had. When Ben and Thera got through the Untamed Lands gate they were told to take, they encountered the 3 they were expecting. 3 gods who had descended upon the world into the bodies of their believers. The average adventurer that was there had no clue who they were but could feel something exuding from them, a feeling of power unlike any other as they wondered if perhaps it was a meeting between 3rd-tier skill holders, not knowing that they were experiencing divinity for the first time. Even Thera, knowing exactly who they were, had to keep herself from bowing down to them. Their presence felt that great. It was only Ben whose skills protected him from the feeling, as well as his general indifference to whatever respect people believed the gods were due, who treated the meeting like any other, walking forward and offering his hand. "Hey! Good to meet you. I guess you'll be keeping us alive for a while, so let's get along." The 2 unknown gods, one of space by the name of Baffle, and the other being the god Slareth, one who represented both forests and hunting that Ben remembered reading about back when he was still at the church, stared at his hand briefly in confusion, not used to mortals acting like that, while the succubus priestess that Analia was wearing chuckled to the side as they both eventually took it, giving it a firm shake while Thera stood with her head in her hands. "I must say, this boyfriend of yours is so good for keeping things interesting, child," Analia told her, giving a friendly pat on the back. "I think it's my first time seeing a mortal give a god a handshake. I'm so sorry he's like this," she said, defeat in her voice as Ben rushed to defend himself. "What? I'm literally just being polite here. This is like as guiltless as I get." "Haha, you've done nothing wrong, child of Myriad. It's just not the first thing a mortal would typically think to do. Pay it no mind. Anyway, Slareth, do you think you can find anything from here?" "No. There'd be no traces for me to track here. I think we'll have to actually do that." At that, Baffle gave a nod, opening a hole in space for them to all walk through, ending up in a familiar place that lacked decent memories for either Ben or Thera. For Ben, it was the place that Thera had been taken by an invader, having her mana constantly drained for reasons neither of them knew, while for Thera it was the place Ben had almost died, only managing to pull through thanks to the strength of the people around him as well as the help of the gods. Neither liked being there, But thankfully it wasn't long as Slareth only cast his eyes around the ground, smelling the earth as he went and pointed. "Take us a kilometer that way and I'll check again after." The spatial god did as he was asked, opening a hole for them to go through, even if the three gods seemed instantly concerned, with that fact becoming greater and greater at each stop. They picked a destination and got there, only for Slareth to give a new one to go to again and again, with Ben eventually breaking down and asking, "So what's the problem here and how worried should we be?" Analia gave a tired shake of her head when he spoke as the trip seemed to wear on the gods. "This is too easy, which points to you being right, unfortunately." Meaning? Even though Slareth is a god who rules over these things, he's finding traces to point us towards after months when none of us nor the investigators we'd sent could find before. It speaks to the idea that a god must have been blocking them, she told him before speaking aloud to the sky. "Helori, what of the ones you're keeping an eye on?" She answered for all to hear. "All right, keep watch while we move. If they try anything, call the others." "Oh, infinite hells," Slareth muttered as the conversation ended and they reached their next destination. "Analia, we've got a problem." "Of course we do," she muttered. "What is it?" There was a settlement here. The eyes of Analia and Baffle went wide at the statement, but neither questioned the accuracy of it, and that left only two options. Either they were demon worshippers like they'd originally feared, potentially in line with an evil god that had somehow joined them without any realizing, or they were something much, much worse. "Tell me we aren't talking about a settlement of full-fledged invaders?" Baffle asked, fearing the worst and bringing Ben and Thera into the worries of the gods. With things about to kick off and the chances of them already having the system, what would we even do in a situation like that? "I don't know," the other god admitted honestly. "Some traces seem similar and others not, but the fact that I can't be certain one way or another is worrying enough." The three gods looked to one another and with one mind began moving faster. Even if Ben was wrong about the demons being part of the system now, all of them knew that it was bad. It was just a matter of extremes. As they rushed through portals one at a time, narrowing it down a kilometer with each jump as they tried to break the distance between them and whatever they were hunting, eventually Slareth called them to a stop. "Analia, it looks like it's on you now," he said as he pointed into the distance. "How far?" "We landed in a good spot. If you start drawing them in, we should see them in a minute." She gave a nod and stretched out a hand towards where she'd been pointed, leaving Ben and Thera to feel the surroundings flood with mana as she did, showing off just what it meant to be the goddess of a race that had charm magic. Unlike the passive effects any of those who worshipped her suffered through, she was completely controlled in the act, her power not being spread around her but instead directed, nor did it take in everything in its path, but focusing in on the one creature she wanted to target, the herd of 40 demons rushing to them. Ben was happy to stand back when he saw them, more than ready to let the gods deal with what was to come than to stand anywhere close to the combat zone as Thera held her staff at the ready, prepared to fight if need be, but it never came to that. With no action behind it to show she'd done a thing other than the feeling of mana rising through the woods. All of the demons before them collapsed fast asleep, instantly killing the tension as she turned to nod at him. "All right, if you'd give them a look we can know just how bad things are going to be for us." He was still feeling hesitant as he walked up to the closest one, but both the gods and Thera were sticking to him, all ready to defend him in the unlikely event that something went wrong as placed his hands on the beast and connected to it. Its mind was a brutal experience, being filled with what seemed like an instinctual bloodlust that he ignored in favor of focusing in on the skills on its soul, swearing as he did. "You know, I remember being told that demons were natural life and death magic users, and I just filed that info away without giving it a second glance," he muttered, the gods understanding where this was going and the fact that it served as absolute proof that he was seeing the system on their souls as he turned to them. "I just don't know why it didn't click later. Why don't people know these things are natural soul magic users?" It was disgustingly clear in his mind, even if it was a variant he didn't understand, with the skill clearly labeled as minor soul magic. Still, the implications were horrifying from what he knew of it, and it made him want to finish these off and leave as fast as possible. It was Analia who answered him, complicated emotions written across the face she was using as she did. They don't possess soul magic in its truest form, and given what the average mortal knows about it, hearing that would only cause a panic. What does the system call it? Minor soul magic. That makes sense, she nodded. Normally for combined magics the true form is the awakened form, with the step below it has the prefix low, so I guess a magic 2 steps lower is considered minor. Either way, at the first tier it's nothing to worry about. It's a magic they can mostly only use on themselves, both to keep themselves alive in a fight as well as advance to the next stage in their development when it gets strong enough. In a sense, it could be considered less useful than either basic life or death magic. To Ben it was an annoying revelation, but to Thera it was a brutal shock. One of the most revered magics to exist, a magic that was being used to try and raise up whatever powerful people it could, and she was just getting to learn that the world's enemies could all use it. She didn't know how to react to hearing it and said nothing, but Ben could detect her worry as he looked at her and spoke up to ease her mind. I suppose this might actually be a good thing, he mused. If it can only be used to heal themselves and help with their growth in their current stage, then that means it can't be used for attacks, right? At least not in the way typical life or death magic could be, though things change if any of them awaken to the next stage. Either way, there's nothing to be done about it. For now, both of you should take advantage of this. Analia told them, gesturing to the sleeping demons and making her intentions clear as the other two gods continued their investigation, not leaving them but opening more gates in the area to look through to try and figure out where to go next, as both Ben and Thera got to work collecting the waiting experience in front of them. Thera hesitated at first, feeling the effects of what the world had been calling the sorrow until that point, but did her best to push past it, using her magic to take them out one by one, while Ben pulled out his knife, placing one of the soul-sealing mana crystals he'd created within it, and got to work stabbing into the closest beast. He watched the crystal light up, a sure sign that it had done as the enchantments on it were designed, as the demon lost its life, and he couldn't help but feel elated as he moved on to the next, not changing his crystal to learn the next bit he needed to, just how many they could hold. He moved from one sleeping demon to the other, getting to 6 before the crystal stopped glowing with his kills, letting him know that it had reached its maximum capacity. So it's nothing compared to Myriad with his seemingly limitless space, but then building a god is kind of a ridiculous benchmark from the beginning, and given just how small of a mana crystal I'm using for storage, this is pretty great in the end. Not sure if I could actually do anything with a crystal with multiple souls though, so let's move on to filling crystals with just one. He had 2 more crystals already set up with more mana batteries in his bag. He could enchant to hold souls, so he took one out, working on setting it up as he killed 2 more demons, getting a soul in each one to make use of before the next was ready, and got one in it too. From there he set up a 4th, but only as he took the time to kill more of the demons that were collapsed around him. He wouldn't be able to get all of them after all, and he wanted the experience. It was as the 4th one was done, and he filled it with another soul, that he heard the notifications ringing out in his head. "Oh, freaking finally," he muttered, more than pleased with the result. He'd been getting good experience with it in the trial, but in his day-to-day life he simply didn't do things that would help it grow. Getting it done felt like a weight had been lifted, and it seemed that Thera had completed hers as well from the way she was at his side, not touching the remaining 10 demons. So he reached his hand into his pocket to take out his job crystal, both to finally take Master Craftsman and to let Thera choose whatever she desired next, only stopping at the cursing of the gods to their side as they opened a new portal. "Hey, I'm not really sure what's going on here, but we need to do something about it," Baffle yelled out to Analia, drawing all of them to the hole in space he'd created and the chaos going on at the other side. His job crystal forgotten, they all stepped through, seeing a scene of carnage before them. At first he thought he was seeing proper invaders killing one another. They had the red scales and violet eyes that were the trademark for the race, but something was clearly different. As much as the body types of a demon could change, letting it be born with shapes more adapted to flying or swimming or even burrowing as he'd seen in the past, they'd always only have those 2 main traits, and certainly nothing like the fur that covered most of them, giving each an appearance he could only describe as werewolves with reptilian limbs. More important than their looks though was what they were doing, a seeming fight to the death, with the brunt of the attack being focused on one man. His body was burned and beaten, enough blood pouring out of him that Ben was shocked to see he could stand, let alone fight, as the children of his race stood behind them, screaming and crying in their parents' arms. "What are you waiting for?" he asked, turning to the gods. "You can't just let this happen, do something." Instead though, like they hadn't even heard him, they just spoke amongst themselves, their voices quiet and angry. "So that's how it was done," Baffle spat out, with Slareth agreeing to whatever he was talking about. "It would be clever if it hadn't just doomed the world. Hell, doomed any other planet in the galaxy that hasn't been invaded yet. Those idiots were really this naked in their greed. It's unbelievable. At least we know who to blame," Analia told them. The calm goddess she usually portrayed gone as she looked ready to explode. "Hellori, make sure they don't leave Quox's realm. Myriad, inform the other gods what happened so they can assist her. Right now the priority is the capture of the forbidden gods. They need to pay for this." He heard the two gods agree but ignored the conversation going on at that end, instead shaking Thera. "We can't just let this happen. You need to cast a sleep spell or something now while we figure this out." The urgency was thick in his voice, enough to shake her from the shock of what they'd just walked in on as she fired off her magic to the crowd in the distance as they collapsed to the ground, unable to withstand the mana she could put into a spell. At least most of them couldn't. The one who'd been fighting so fiercely, seemingly to protect the others, went down when the rest did. But he fought off the intense desire for sleep, trying to watch just what was happening, even if he lacked the strength to do any more. He'd been pushing himself as far as he could, and while he understood that his people weren't dead, he knew that after such a display, if they wanted to kill them all, they could easily. He was keeping his eyes open to meet his end and see if he really had made the wrong choice. Ben knew none of this though, and instead grabbed Thera's hand, pulling her along to them with his previous concerns forgotten as they got to Toltho, the one who was still just barely awake despite being the most heavily injured. He leaned down to touch him, connecting to get a better idea of what was going on despite any potential dangers, and felt a mind in a mess. Fear and worry for his people, anger at his gods, loss for those who'd already died, and worry that he'd made the wrong choice as the skills the creature had filled Ben's mind as well, even if they were a mere side note in everything else. It felt nothing like the invader he'd connected to in the past, nor the demons he just had when he'd been checking their skills. In every way that mattered, it felt like a person. "Thera, heal him," he asked as he watched her do nothing. "Ben, this looks like an invader," she told him, unwilling to act when it could be such a dangerous creature. "Not exactly, girl, but they still need to die," Saleth told them as he picked up a thick log, preparing to bring it down on one as Ben stood in front of him. "If they're not invaders, then what are they that deserves a death sentence?" he asked angrily, not moving from the spot and refusing to let the god attack. It was Analia who answered, pinching the bridge of her nose as she did. "They're the reason the system incorporated demons, or at least they're what the forbidden gods created that resulted in it. It appears those fools forcibly bred demons with a gentler animal and uplifted them with what little of their faith remained. I can only imagine it was a means to reduce what they'd spend on the act, since demons are already on the edge of sapience before they change themselves. But incorporating what's essentially a demon relative into the system was enough to destabilize the safeguards that kept invaders from becoming a part of it. Those blasted idiots. So that's why they have to die. They're made of demons. Apostle of Myriad. Now get out of my way." "No, that doesn't give any reason to kill them. I have demon bits in me. Do I need to die for that too?" he asked, casting a judgmental look to the gods before him. "All you pricks can read minds. Were you seeing something irredeemable in their thoughts? I'll admit some of them weren't looking great, but at least one looked like he was prepared to die to protect the others. Not to mention some of them are kids? Or do you guys get off on shit like this?" Ben had no desire to protect demons. He understood that even if hypothetically they might not all be evil, they'd taken over hundreds of worlds at least and killed an uncountable number of people on each. But that was just it, these weren't demons. He wasn't clear on the specifics, but it sounded like they were made by the forbidden gods. As wrong as that might have been, it wasn't their fault, and just as importantly, nothing would change by getting rid of them. "The child is right, Slareth," Analia said, placing a gentle hand on the other god's arm. "The system has accepted the demons. Even if we kill everyone on this world before the gates open, that fact won't change. Unfortunately, these are just people born from fools, they don't deserve to die for it. That will be the idiots who made them. He didn't look happy, but the god dropped the branch after only a moment as Analea left his side to heal some of the ones around with Thera doing the same, even if she still seemed unsure. It was only as his wounds healed that the only man who was still awake said 2 words before letting himself drift off. "Thank you." It hadn't been expected, but that small bit of gratitude was enough to let herself give them the benefit of the doubt as she cast her eyes around the forest filled with the injured and dying, and with renewed effort got to work healing them. Hilori's voice came for all to hear as Analea nodded and turned to the other gods. "Good. Could you 2 grab 5 of the remaining demons from before? The sooner we get this done, the better." At her request, a new portal was opened and demons dragged through as Ben let himself lay down, the voice of Myriad filling his head. "I have no clue what you're talking about, it's super simple. I do what's right as long as I don't feel like doing something that's only a little wrong. And come on, you have to admit killing them would be pretty damn wrong." "What an interesting point, that gives me an idea. Hey, since it sounds like these guys might not have their own gods for much longer, do any of you mind if I call dibs for Myriad?" He asked aloud as Analea laughed despite herself, and the other 2 just looked shocked that the offer even went out as they dragged the last demon through. "I believe they're all yours," Analea told him. "This works out easier anyway. As the reason they were discovered, you might as well have the first choice." "Awesome, thanks. Well, aren't I just freaking great at my job? You can tell me you love me if you need to. I get it. Hey, don't be like that, there has to be a couple hundred of them. After this, you might not even be the god with the fewest followers. This is great for you." "Oh boy, well I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it." It took some time for them all to be healed, and while just how to handle them all once they woke up was one question, what would happen to their gods was another entirely that Analea seemed to be ready to answer then and there. "Hilori, what's the current status of the 5 of them?" she asked the sky as the answer came down for all to hear. "It would be a waste to let that happen. Given what they did, they need to at least die in a way that will aid the world. Send them down." All at once the 5 unconscious demons seemed to change. It wasn't in a physical way, but it was enough to make it clear to Ben and Thera what had happened. As with the 3 people before them, each of them were giving off divinity as they were being inhabited by gods. Myriad? Maybe some context, please? Wasn't it hard for a god to be in a body of a race that hadn't worshipped them for a while, though? I doubt the actual demons were giving them any faith. Interesting. A shame we can't deal with them here and now. The god baffle spat at their unconscious forms. But I like my priest too much to get him any sacrilege levels. I suppose we'll have to take them to one of the trials, Analea agreed. If we go to mine, I can deal with them using my avatar. They should be too weak to do much about it. Wait, I feel like I just heard something even more interesting. Ben thought as he perked up while Myriad grew worried in his mind. Hey all of you. If you're willing to wait a bit, I have a great idea to get them dealt with fast, while also making things easier for Myriad to deal with their believers if you're all good with it. The gods looked at him in confusion, the mess that was his mind making it a challenge to get a clear image from his thoughts, while Thera found herself uncomfortably sure she had an idea of where this was going, as Myriad was cursing in the meantime. None of it mattered to Ben though. After what he'd just been through, he wanted to not only be stronger, but to feel secure in his strength, and he was sure he'd found the perfect way to make it happen. Only you would be like this, Myriad complained in his realm between meetings while Ben was there beside him. The others only agreed because they don't think you'll actually be able to do it. They think they'll have to fake it in the end to help deal with the more stubborn believers. Hey, it's a good idea, so why waste the opportunity? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Speaking of though, are you sure this is working? He asked as he held a rainbow mana battery in his hand, enchanting it as he did to have the soul-sealing properties he'd worked so hard to create. At least it felt like he did, but normally nothing he did in his god's realm had any effect on the real world. The fact it did this time was entirely due to the request to see if it was even possible. It's working. I'm setting up replicas up here and your body is in a sleepwalking state so you can get to your stuff and interact with it properly, but we're not doing this again. What? Why not? It feels so handy and now I can practice my skills twice as much. Hell, I wish we'd been doing this since I met you. Look, doing this once is fine and we could probably do this every year or so without worries, but you really don't want to get your body used to sleepwalking or sleepcasting. Moving around while you're asleep is dangerous enough, but using mana? You could end up keeping yourself in a perpetual state of mana exhaustion and just not wake up. Alright, point taken. Let's never do this again if it's not an emergency. He was sure Myriad would be able to wake him up if that did ever happen, but that was only if he noticed before it became a problem. His god was becoming busier and busier, so there was always a chance a couple days could pass without being contacted. He didn't want to spend that long unconscious. Their discussion ended as they brought the next group up though, a family unit of the sleeping believers the Forbidden Gods had created, who immediately felt blinded by Myriad's radiance. Ben's bet had been right. The Forbidden Gods interacted with their believers as much as any average god did, meaning that despite how few of them there were, they weren't used to being in the presence of divinity, and even if Myriad would spend a lot of his faith, there was no denying that he'd clearly grown in power compared to when they'd first met, even if Ben barely picked up on it himself. With the last family there, the two of them simply talked to them all kindly, explaining who they were, why they were there, the lies their gods had told them, or at least what they were able to pick up on based on what the prior groups had said, and most important of all, that they wouldn't be harmed. Ben couldn't be certain of how their gods originally treated them, though Myriad was able to pick it up from their thoughts, with his initial reluctance to take them in weakening with each group. They could both tell that these were simply people who wanted to live and to never experience what they'd just gone through again, with even the ones on the attacking side begging forgiveness for their acts in the face of a real god. Once they were gone, Ben took his knife in his hands that was used to house the soul-sealing crystals, adding 2 enchantments along its edge. Both his level 8 sacrilege, as well as the aspects of his unending crafting that made tools easier to cut with. Looking at him, Ben couldn't help but get the impression his god was plenty uncomfortable with the minor alteration, as the last group was called. Not a family this time, but the 5 priests of the 5 gods. They were both prepared for a far tougher conversation than any of the last. These weren't the garden variety believers that they'd just been dealing with after all, but the priests that would speak to the gods directly. What neither of them expected was that they'd all show the same reaction as the rest, prostrating themselves immediately in the face of Myriad's divinity, with only the one who'd fought the other for so fiercely able to look up even a little. Myriad said directly into his mind, not speaking to him as he usually did while in his realm to keep things private. What? Are you sure? Jesus, so they took my faith generators to the uncomfortable conclusion, huh? Huh? Ben thought back at the same time that the priest has called out. My wonderful lords, just to be this close to you, what an honor you give us. To feel your warmth and love as I never have before. Uh-huh? Ben asked again, looking directly at his god in question as the priest went on. A floating cube? Ben thought back, doing all he could to suppress a laugh as his god ignored him. I'm not your god, Kaz, Myriad said, pulling his name from the thoughts of the others. I have nothing to do with your gods. My name is Myriad, and I'm simply here to explain to you how you've been mistreated and hope you all might give me the trust that I'll do better. Ben could see confusion in the eyes of 4 of them. It was only Tolthos who shone with relief as his god explained to all of them as he had to the others before just what really happened. He tried to be kind, but there was no easy way to tell someone that the ones they'd spent their lives worshipping were evil by all accounts, and by the end they were all handling it different ways. Tolthos seemed like a weight had been lifted from him, as if the choice he'd made had been validated. Tears were streaming down the face of Plet as Nada and Empa seemed to be in shock, a not uncommon response amongst the believers. It was only Kaz who denied it, standing up before him and screaming, Lies! How dare the rest of you believe this nonsense? Can't you see this must be a trick of the strange ones? Our gods warned us against them, yet you all give in so easily. Even if this is a trick, I'll take it, Taltho said as he stared the other priest in the face. We were tricked enough believing in beings that would have us kill each other for their own convenience. It looked like Kaz was going to lunge at him, only stopping when Myriad spoke again, not able to keep himself from yielding to the divinity he felt. You'll see for yourself soon enough anyway, his god said with a small shake, picking up on the confusion of the priests. After all, your old gods need to be judged for their acts. But for now rest. After all that's happened, you deserve at least that. With those final words, the priests vanished from his realm, leaving Myriad to collapse to the ground when they did as Ben encouraged him. Gotta say, I think you handled that real well, man. Very godly of you. MMH, thanks. Now to just see the chaos that's going to come with what you're about to do. Honestly, it's really the other gods' fault that this is going to happen. You were the first mortal to escape that trial, not to mention your other nonsense. Don't know what good will come from underestimating you. Well, hey, their mistake is my gain, so let's see just how much I'm going to get out of this. Who knows? If things work out, you might just get to enjoy my company forever instead of just my short little mortal life. I want to be sick just thinking about this. Ben opened his eyes, the 5 soul-sealing crystals in his hand as well as his knife as he looked around. Thera was leaning beside him as she read to mentally escape every revelation that had been forced on her that day, trying to gain a better understanding of how to use her magics in tandem instead of thinking on the fate of the world, while the gods were still talking to the sky, discussing all that had happened. You know, I think soul crystals has a nicer ring to it than soul-sealing crystals, don't you? Not particularly. I just hadn't thought of a proper name for them yet. Might as well get it out of the way. Are you ready for your attempt? Analia asked as soon as she noticed he was up. She was only one of a handful of gods that didn't doubt him, but as with the others, she had no issue with what he'd be attempting. In fact, she found herself heavily anticipating it. Mostly. For now, do you think you could wake all of them up but weaken them so they can't make any rash moves? He asked, nodding his head to the still sleeping people before he continued with an afterthought. Ah, maybe not the children though, they don't really need to see this. Analia nodded, and as she was doing that, Ben turned to Thera. Hey, willing to trust me a bit? He asked, giving his most winning smile as she looked exhausted at just the thought of what he'd be doing. He hadn't given the full details, but what he had alone was enough to be outrageous. Well, I was always likely to get a level or 2 of sacrilege spending so much time with you. Now that we're dating, I guess I can handle shouldering a bit of your madness and the consequences. Hey, it will be fine, don't worry. More than fine even, but admittedly you may get a couple levels of it. But also it's harmless, so don't worry. Harmless unless someone finds out and attacks you on the street, she pointed out. That happened once, and it was mostly because of my status as a whole. Anyway, you still need to take a new job, right? Do me a favor and take Adventurer. That little request was enough to let her see where he was going, and she immediately felt a lot less hesitant in the face of the potential benefits. She took the offered job crystal and made her choice, handing it back for Ben to make his. Available jobs. Trap User. Craftsman Alchemy Path. Craftsman Artistic Path. Craftsman Blacksmith Path. Craftsman Cooking Path. Craftsman Stonecrafts Path. Craftsman Sewing Path. Heretic. Holy Craftsman. Kin. A Mathematician. Adventurer. Cursed Item Maker. Scholar. A Master Craftsman. A Material Mage. A Master Enchanter. Destruction Mage. A High Tank. As all the options filled his mind, he couldn't help but let out a low whistle. I sure have come a long way from only having one. I want to be stronger, Myriad. I don't ever want to be in a position like the trial again. All right, I take Heretic. He could have selected it silently in his head, but he didn't see the point, having fully assumed that the gods were already looking into his thoughts as he was taking it with no idea just how much of a struggle that was quickly becoming to do to him without the practice Myriad had. Analia was left mildly amused by the choice, while the other 2 gods just seemed shocked as they muttered together. You don't think that's enough to dash? Of course not, he didn't even get a level of it. How high could he possibly be to actually be able to kill something with a god in it? I'm sure Analia will deal with it when he fails. O ye of little faith. Ben asked Thera to invite him into her party, the main perk of the adventurer job that it resulted in their job pools being merged, and held his knife in his hand as he walked up to the first of the sleeping demons housing a god while looked out into the crowd of its old believers before them, all of them now awake, but unable to move, unable to help if a misplaced sense of loyalty compelled them to, as Analia called out. By now you've all heard the situation, she told them in a voice filled to the brim with compassion, none of the anger she felt for their gods directed at them. We don't blame you for existing, no being chooses their birth, but it's undeniable that the consequences that the forbidden gods have brought are immeasurable, with the countless other gods who share this world finding them lacking in any trait that would spare them. As such, the Apostle of Myriad, the god who will act as your new caretaker as you all come to understand this world, will carry out their sentence, and you'll see just how weak and unworthy these beings truly are. With that, she lifted the magic that kept the forbidden gods asleep, speaking to Ben in a quiet voice before they were completely roused from their enforced slumber. Are you sure you're okay with this? Killing is... well, it can be difficult. If you don't think you can just signal me and we'll make it look good. Thanks, Analia. But honestly, for whatever it might say about me, I don't think I'll have any issues. His god seemed convinced that the acts of violence he had caused in the past without feeling anything was a reflection of how he handled it as a whole, and while he'd never considered it before, hearing it said made him want to deny it outright. He had a sense of right and wrong, and he tried hard enough to help others. He'd be sad if anyone he cared about was hurt or died. But none of that applied to the beings before him. They may have very well doomed the world with the choice they'd made. They were far from guiltless like the race they'd created. Even if they were fully sapient, he couldn't help but easily look past the fact that they were essentially people and only focus on just what he'd gained from this. I can't help but wonder if I was always like this or if being on this world's changed me. No, you know what, it doesn't matter. Either way, it doesn't change things right now. He shook the thought from his head, just in time for the gods trapped within the demons to come to their senses, screaming as they did. What are you worthless fools doing? Attack them! One screamed at their believers in a voice the priests could tell belonged to the god Iflud, as the others had their own things to say, with only one addressing Analia herself. What right do you have to judge us? Quox spat. You with so many believers, you with so much faith to spare. Do you have any idea what it's like to feel yourself starve each day with a feast before your eyes? Of course not, no god that risked themselves to save their people would, she said dismissively, not caring in the slightest what they had to say but still feeling spiteful as she did. Of course, I do know of a lovely little god who's dealt with that. A friendly cube who's actually guiltless that will make a wonderful guardian of the race you created. What? You're giving them to that freak? Hey! Watch who you're calling a freaking asshole, Ben yelled back, thinking of starting with him for what he'd said about Myriad but deciding to save him till the end instead as he held the knife. PFF. You think I'm going to be afraid of this little farce? Quox asked. As much as gods can be killed, there needs to be far more strength than coming from you, boy. All of you up there think you have us? Just you wait. I'll dash. He stopped his tirade mid-sentence from the shock as he saw Ben plunge his knife into the neck of the demon Iflud had been forced into, the effects of the sacrilege enchantment doing its job with the soul crystal glowing in response as his mind exploded with notifications. Okay, this is a lot to take in. The system notifications simply didn't stop as the names of gods who apparently wanted to see what was going on in his head kept increasing with no silence to come, but he pushed that to the side for the time being. The fact that he was hearing that new notification made him think that with whatever change awakening sacrilege had brought, it had given him just a little more privacy. I genuinely don't know where to start with all this. 5 new titles is crazy as it is, but 2 of them are definitely the same, just worded slightly different. As for the skill, I honestly would have been shocked if I didn't awaken it. If killing a god didn't work, then nothing would, but getting so many levels and still having 4 gods to go, it just might be possible. He tried to keep himself from looking happy, really from giving any sort of expression as he tried to deal with all of the new notifications in one fell swoop, hoping that answering in his head would work as he did. Grant permission to Myriad, Analia, and Hellori. Deny everyone else. All at once the notifications stopped, only for the sounds of 3 gods screaming in his mind to take its place. Ahem, is this not a normal thing if you awaken sacrilege? He thought sheepishly, with Myriad screaming in his head. Well, after sacrilege changed to King of Sacrilege, I started getting a lot of system notifications asking if I wanted to allow different gods to look into my mind, and I just denied everyone but you 3. Hellori muttered in his mind. She trailed off as Myriad had his own things to say. His god complained, already feeling regretful that he'd agreed to this so easily. It was only Analea who seemed calm once she understood what had happened, placing a hand on his arm and speaking to him with the voice of the believer she was using. "Ben, I believe it's best you get back to it. We can worry about the rest later." But Analea-Baffle started, being shut down instantly with her icy glare. "We agreed to this. Don't tell me you intend to retract your word, because you didn't believe he actually could?" He backed off in an instant, as did the god beside him, while Ben did his best not to stare at the gods and people around him once they'd gained his attention. The notifications were one thing, but looking around it could be seen that how he could see the world had changed too. The bodies inhabited by gods clearly distinguishable from Thera and the group watching, but even they seemed to have something in them that he could only assume was the faith they gave off. But that's something to think more on later. He thought quietly as he changed the soul crystal in his knife for an empty one and walked over to Thera, catching the complicated expression on her face as he did. Did you get a couple levels?" he asked awkwardly, suddenly really hoping he hadn't got his girlfriend stuck with something like that, though she just shook her head. "Something else. I'll tell you later. I'll tell you later." "All right, well for now you should take a job that you want but think would be hard to complete. Better to get it out of the way while you can." Sure, in that case it will be high telekinetic mage." With her job selected, Thera handed the crystal back to Ben as he went to choose adventurer, only to pause as he noticed the new option down on the bottom of the list. "Hey Myriad, do you think I'd be able to complete the Divine Heretic job after killing one or two of these guys? Or would it take a lot more?" "What I'm hearing is take it after adventurer." "Got it." Name: Ben Hef. Race: human. Titles: Apostle of Myriad, the Forgotten One, Miracle Maker, Skill Learner, Enemy of Aneth, Trial Defier, Trial Breaker, Godslayer, Monster, Madman, God Killer, Threat. Jobs: Adventurer, LV2. Previous jobs: Apprentice Craftsman, Craftsman, Priest, Enchanter, Mind User, Magic Item Maker, Magic Weapon Maker, High Enchanter, Fractured Mind User, Tree Tamer, High Craftsman, Apprentice Mage, True Mage, Tank, Heretic. Attributes: A Vitality, 602. A Vitality Recovery Rate, 11 per hour. Mana, 462. Mana Recovery Rate, 30 per minute. Strength, 485. Agility, 181. Stamina, 1595. Intelligence, 1406. Affinities: Light 3. Life 2. Fire, 4. Water 3. Air, 4. Earth 2. Death 3. Dark 1. Space, 4. Time 5. Resistances: Light, 68. Life, 72. Fire, 75. Water, 69. Air, 66. Earth, 81. Death, 78. Dark, 85. Space, 63. Time, 61. Blessed skills: Unending Crafting LV1*. Divine Enchanting LV1*. Focus LV9. Passive skills: World Speak Plus. King of Sacrilege LV3*. Complex Mind LV7. A Bind. Partial Demonic Body. Defense Enhancement LV4. Parallel Thought LV6. Absorption Resistance LV3. Plant Knowledge LV4. A Mental Expansion LV5. Healing Enhancement LV2. All Affinity Resistance Enhancement LV2. Limit Breaker LV0. Active Skills: Stealth LV1. Connect LV9. Hidden Mind LV7. Calculate LV4. Meditation LV4. Cycling LV0. Marksmanship LV0. Speed Reading LV3. Material User LV4. Destruction LV4. Swimming LV1. Blessings: Myriad's Blessing. Analea's Blessing. Hilori's Blessing. Galwax's Blessing. Elvit's Mana Regeneration Blessing. Trials: Trial of Analia and Talona. Trial of the Dead God. He briefly took out his card to see the changes and felt himself swoon with how awakening the skill boosted his attributes, even if it was only by 12.5%. He was definitely getting to the point where it was less significant, but even then it wasn't like that mattered. It was just that the major bonus of awakening a skill was turning into a minor one, but even if he somehow managed to awaken a dozen skills, he'd take every little bit he could get. First, though, he needed to see if the adventurer job would act the way he thought it would. It was a job that gained experience from killing monsters after all, with more given depending on how powerful the creature killed was. A single Leviathan was enough to let a party of 6 complete all of theirs. And though they weren't technically monsters, nobody could deny a god was powerful. Combined with the fact that they were trapped within creatures that always gave experience when killed regardless of the job, and there was the potential for plenty to be gained as he walked up to the next. Seeing it try to say something but stabbing it before it could get a word out as his newly awakened skill showed him exactly where to hit. A small part of him acknowledged other aspects that King of Sacrilege seemed to change for him. There was no denying that it was significantly easier for him to kill this one than the last, the knife slicing into it like butter, but there was also what he was seeing as a whole. Before, sacrilege was like an instinct pointing him to what he should do to cause harm, but now it was as if the forbidden gods and the other 3 they'd come with had lit up before him, with pinpointed areas highlighted to show how to cause the most harm. Beyond that was what he'd already noticed, looking into the crowd. Each of the people he and Myriad had talked to were visibly different to him as well, with the strongest change amongst them coming from those who looked the most devastated to see their gods die. All of that was interesting and something to be explored later, but no more than a mental footnote in the face of what he might achieve. Holy crap. Give it to me straight, Myriad. What do you think the odds are? Will do. He tossed the job crystal back to Thera so she could take a new one. There was no way for him to keep sharing the experience as much as he wanted to unless she wanted to kill one herself, and from the look of it, she wasn't interested. Of course, given what Myriad said, that's probably for the best. Analia seems pretty cool with it, but that doesn't mean every god's going to be thrilled about a mortal doing something like this. Still, they'd agreed to it, so he wasn't too concerned, even if they only had because they hadn't believed he could. Even if some of them knew he had the sacrilege skill, none of them had known just how high he'd had it, and combined with the others in his possession, it had made making the current enchantment on his knife easy. Man, now that I think about it, no wonder some of them are uncomfortable. I wonder if a mortal has ever made a weapon that could do this? A thought for later. He made his way to the next forbidden god. Everything about him that made him divine was locked away as fear filled his eyes. Wait, don't! He yelled as he begged. I raised up the Afri, I slayed Zertoro. I've survived so much, you can't do this to Dash. His words were cut short as Ben did exactly that, replacing his soul crystal as the notifications of a complete job filled his head. I thought it might at least take 2. I wonder how much potential experience is just being lost to the void after each kill. A shame I can't just stock it up and apply it to as many jobs as I can fill, but then at that point I might actually run out of jobs if I could. He took the crystal back from Thera, seeing another complicated expression cross her face that he was fairly sure had nothing to do with the violent activities he was currently engaged in, but resolved to talk about it later. As he looked through the jobs he had left to choose from, he was disappointed to see there wasn't a new heretic variant he could take, meaning he didn't have any other option that would gain experience from killing them, just whatever came from the demons they were forced into. While high tank sounded like it might do the job, if it was anything like the original tank job, then he already knew it only gained experience defensively, one dedicated to drawing fire and taking hits. It was only as he was about to select Master Craftsman that he considered one more option. One single choice he knew nothing about that could potentially gain the experience he wanted from the act, even as his god caught on to his thoughts and cried out. Relax, Myriad. If it doesn't let me finish the job, then I'll just waste whatever experience I gain killing this next one and change it. Besides, even if it does, my single demonic skill has no level, so it can't grow. There's nothing to worry about. He went up to the second last one, who had gone all but catatonic, unable to accept the reality of the situation that not only was he about to die, but by the hands of a mortal no less. If he'd had the self-awareness, he might have viewed it as penance for letting the entirety of his people die, but for one so centered on continuing his own existence without a second thought, those he had abandoned in the past hadn't crossed his mind. in the same way they hadn't for the past few centuries as Ben stabbed into him, watching the soul crystal glow. He felt a small shudder run through his body. He took to be Myriad dealing with the last notification as he let out a small cough. I haven't heard that notification before. His god spoke, sounding like he was doing it through gritted teeth despite the lack of a mouth. Yeah, I'll do that. He could already tell he was in for an earful later, and even he had to admit it was probably well-deserved given that he'd taken both jobs his god had specifically asked him not to go for, as well as the advanced variant of one of them. He didn't regret it for a second. All of the bonuses he'd managed to gain in a single day would be incredible for both his growth as well as keeping him alive if disaster ever struck again. But for Myriad's sake, he could only hope there wouldn't be a new job to tempt him when he checked the crystal, and to his minor disappointment there wasn't. Well, it was a bit of a stranger path to get here than I'd ever thought, but I guess I'm taking Master Craftsman. Oh, a new knowledge skill score. He felt everything he knew about materials solidify in his mind, as it did with any knowledge skill he gained, but this felt more significant than any of the ones he did in the past, if only for the sheer volume he knew. A part of him couldn't help but question the fact that he'd gained it at a level higher than his current plant knowledge but brushed that away. He was aware of the basic rules of the universe's chemistry thanks to his lessons with Quillith, though his knowledge of its biology was lacking and he assumed that was what made the difference. Still, gaining it was exciting for him. He'd have to take the time to really plunge into the books he owned on the topic he had yet to touch, but that would be for once he returned to Stonewall, a goal that seemed like it would be delayed yet again. Well, just the one left, he said, giving Quox a smile that the god found to be more horrifying than any demon or evil god could ever be. It was a smile that spoke of just how close Ben was to achieving the third tier, hopefully only needing the death of this god to awaken him beyond the limit of mortals. Just want you to know that while the others were completely impersonal, even if they did help screw over the world I'm stuck on, you decided to insult my buddy on top of all of that, so this might hurt a little more than the others dealt with. Wait, stop, please. He cried out through the mouth of a demon, turning to Analia for mercy when he saw he'd gained none from Ben. A blessing, a skill, anything. I have the strength. Surely there's someone you'd want to have it. Please just spare me. He'd thought there was a chance that he'd have been able to escape as the gods dragged them to their execution, still trapped in the uncomfortable body of a demon, but at the very least alive, and with the potential to even use it to slip in among the invasion when it started so long as he could avoid the heavens' wrathful gaze, but failing that he'd always planned to bargain for his life like this. Giving either to someone who wasn't his believer wouldn't be easy, it would burn a ridiculous amount of faith, but it was all he could offer, even if he could only do it once and given what they were all preparing for, strengthening anyone who could be useful would be an asset. It was the reaction to the offer that gave him the glimmer of hope he needed as Analia raised a hand, calling Ben to stop. What sort of skill are you offering? An attribute enhancement, he was quick to say, trying to show his worth. They match my nature as a god perfectly. Just say the word and I'll do it. She stared him in the eyes, seeing the desperation there before turning away, giving him the briefest moment of panic before she spoke again. Thera, come along, child. I can't think of anyone who would benefit from a skill like that as much as you would. Your mana regeneration rate is far too low compared to how much you have, so that will be the one you get enhanced. The forbidden god silently cheered, though Thera seemed less sure. Analia, it's not that I don't appreciate it, but I really think it would be better if he died, all things considered. At that, Quox screamed. Just take it, you dash, his tone only lowered as he felt Ben's knife on his throat. Silly girl. No need to turn down something so helpful. Trust your goddess. This is the right choice, child, Analia told her. Just place a hand on him. If he tries anything, I'll have his soul destroyed before he can ever make such an error again. A terrifying thought for the final forbidden god, with Quox not sure how equipped she was to carry it out. He simply didn't care enough about the other gods to learn about them in detail, but he was doing this for his survival. He would take it seriously. Thera's hand on his head. He felt the bindings on him that were restricting his power loosen. Not enough to do anything major, all he could do was what he offered. Analia watched the entire time, commenting as he began. Is that really all you're going to put into the blessing? I can see you have far more faith to use than that. But dash. No buts. All of it. Every drop of your ill-gotten faith that isn't going towards giving her the skill. He didn't want to. He didn't want to give everything he had when he'd worked so hard over the last few centuries to get it, but even if it would leave him almost powerless, having to scavenge whatever stray bits existed in the world without going to a specific host, he'd at least be alive for a little while longer, and it wasn't like it was impossible that the world he found himself on would win after all. It was better than dying on the spot, so he did as he was told. Analia smiled as she heard the notifications go off in Thera's mind before turning back to Ben. All right, you can finish him now. What? That wasn't Dash. He never got to air out his complaints in the end as Ben's blade stabbed into him, his final crystal lighting up with the souls it absorbed. Even if she understood why it happened, it left Thera feeling conflicted to have taken something from a god under false pretenses, but her own wrapped her in her arms. Given what those fools did, this is better than any of them deserve, and now more than ever it's important to get any bit of strength you can, Thera. On that note, it's unfortunate, child of Myriad, but it looks like you won't be becoming a god anytime soon. She told him with a small chuckle that he returned with a shrug. Ah, I knew getting to the 3rd tier wasn't a guarantee. I'm just happy to have awakened another skill and gotten some levels and bonuses. All in all, this worked out about as well as it could have, he said, giving a happy laugh as he did and feeling exceptionally good about how that had all worked out for him in the end. It wasn't the power he'd hoped he could achieve by getting to the 3rd tier, but it was a lot while also giving him plenty of room to grow. It was only as Thera gave him a confused look as he was lost in his thoughts, grabbing his face and bringing it to hers, seeming as if she was staring into him, that he left his inner world. Thera. Not that I don't love the passion, but we definitely have an audience here. Not to mention all the gods watching us, he teased as he wrapped his arms around her. Maybe we should wait for a bit of privacy. She for her part ignored it, having something far more important to focus on as she spoke up. Ben, your eyes have turned violet. He felt surprise course through him as Thera said it, and he gently pulled away, reaching into his bag to get a small white mana crystal to hold up to his eye. What little reflection he saw was crude, nothing compared to the mirror he'd have liked to have, but it was enough to see that Thera was right. Neither the whites nor the pupil were different, but his iris had changed to a vibrant violet, the same as any demon. So I definitely need to make sure I haven't sprouted any scales anywhere later. He thought to himself, turning quickly to Analia, who wore a small, worried look, not having noticed the minor detail until it was pointed out. So how worried should I be about this? You're asking about an experience nobody else has gone through, the goddess pointed out. I don't believe it's bad, but I can't exactly say it's nothing either. Well, I guess I'll just keep an eye on things and hope for the best. In the meantime, I can't help but remember being told that bodies possessed by gods were good for both potions and materials. If only you knew somebody with an awakened crafting skill who could handle both, he said, fluttering his eyes at the goddess and getting a small laugh. As charming as it is to watch you try and get all you can from this, the bodies will be taken to an awakened alchemist to brew potions with, and will decide how the bones and skins will be divided later. Considering what a limited number of people there are who can do anything with them, I'm sure you and your teacher will find yourselves with something to play with, she said, smiling at his obvious disappointment before turning to Thera. We'll be leaving shortly. As I'm sure you can imagine, there's plenty to deal with from all of this, but would you like to come back with us or stay here with your lover? Why is Ben staying here? She asked, turning to him as he thought of all he'd have to do now that the exciting bit was over. Myriad is taking in all of these people, so I at least need to stay for a bit to help get them set up and put them on the path to being good little members of his faith. It might be a couple weeks, he explained, as just how monumental a task that would be set in. Oh God. I need to explain the state of the world and the invasion and try to properly motivate them all to convert and look at how they're living. They're sleeping in tents and it doesn't seem like they do any agriculture. I'll at least need to build them houses. He felt a migraine forming as he looked around, seeing more and more that would be good to do while he was there. And I don't even have any tools with me. Damn it, this is going to be the Dryad village all over again. They'd left their cart at the Church of Analia, But at the very least he had his bag with him that contained all of the rings he'd brought for the contest, as well as a few books, and most important of all, he'd have Thera. "I'll stay," she told her goddess. "He's far too likely to be murdered when nobody's watching him." "Very well, in that case we should be off. Thera, it's always lovely. I'll check in on you while you're here. Contender Ben, do try to keep out of trouble." With that, the three gods picked up the bodies the forbidden gods died in as a portal was opened and they all stepped through. What did she mean when she called me that?" he asked, getting an uncertain look as he did. "I don't know. But I heard Vasta call Uncle that as well while you were in the trial." "Interesting. Myriad, wanna chime in?" Fine, but before you go, I think you know exactly what quest I want." With that out of the way and seeing that he wouldn't immediately get any answers, he pushed the matter of whatever it meant to be a contender to the side, instead looking at the crowd behind him, all shocked and stunned by what they witnessed, with the priest wailing as two others cried as well. They could feel whatever connection they'd had with their gods breaking as they died. Now it was up to him to pick up the pieces. "Great. I'm sure you all have a lot of complicated feelings about what happened, and honestly, that's okay," he began. "You've been through a lot, and if you want to mourn their loss, then neither I nor Myriad will try to stop you. But as we've already explained, those gods weren't treating you well. They weren't letting you live real lives. The faith you gave wouldn't maintain the world like they said. All it did was make them stronger for their own benefit. Now you'll have plenty of time to enjoy your time in this world, not needing to give every spare minute to work and prayer. Hell, as an apostle, I only give a couple minutes a day and it's more than enough for Myriad. But I won't even ask you to give that much if you don't want to. Of course, there's plenty of benefits. You're honestly all pretty lucky to have him take you in. He gives all of his believers his blessing after a day or two, and you'll receive his skill after a few months of prayer. Well, there's plenty of good points about him, but he'll be visiting you all in your dreams to talk for a while to come. You'll get to discover all of those yourself eventually." He saw looks of confusion from the ones who had themselves together as Toltho spoke up, hesitant but wanting answers. "If you don't mind, ask away. What exactly is an apostle?" "Yeah, fair enough." It was surprising to learn that the village only had the 5 priests, no other pillars for each of the 5, but it seemed it was another way that those gods had skimped out on spending faith. "An excellent question. It's one of the pillars of faith for a god, with the other 2 being the head priest and the oracle. You can basically just think of me as Myriad's priest though. Anything else? I'll be here for a while to help try and raise your quality of life, so don't be afraid to ask anything you want to know. Eventually, the goal would be to have you all interact with the world as a whole if you want to." Toltho had many questions, endless questions after his world had all but shattered, but for the time being he stuck to basing them on what Ben had said. "In that case, you mentioned your god could give us skills, the same way the voice does, but what exactly is a blessing?" "Wait, what?" Ben asked back, confusion on his face. "It's something gods can give to their believers that can help them raise their skill levels and jobs. Admittedly, most of them are pretty stingy with them. Myriad's best point is the fact that he gives them to all of his believers. He's an incredibly generous god like that, and all of you will be able to grow stronger as a result if you accept him." "And how exactly does that help us with our work?" another asked, seeing that Ben seemed agreeable enough to answer them. "What? No, I'm talking about, oh my god, you guys don't have a job crystal, do you? And the fact that you haven't heard of them means you don't have cards either. I mean, of course you don't have cards, how would you have gotten them? But still." He tried not to think about how much they didn't know. In a lot of ways, despite all of them being born on the world, they were like him when he'd first arrived. They just need to learn. He took his personal job crystal out of his pocket, holding it up for them to see. "Okay, this here is a job crystal. It lets you access a benefit of the system where you select an area you want to grow. To put it simply, it can help you become stronger, faster, smarter, healthier, and better at magic. And if you're lucky, you might get a new skill or a level to one you already have. I can check what skills you have for you, so if you all come up one by one, we can discuss the options you have as well as how you want to grow. While that's happening, well, I'm not sure how you all treat your dead, but I think it would be best to handle it." The bodies from just before they'd arrived were still left in the open, and a few of the people took their eyes off of him to begin dealing with that, though nobody stepped up to take a job, at least not right away. Eventually, it was Toltho who left the group and walked towards him. Acting as the leader he was by being brave enough to risk learning from the man before him he'd been taught all of his life to fear. In the realm of gods, where all who ruled over the races of the world resided, ever staring down at the acts of their people, an exceedingly rare event was being held. A meeting to discuss the fate of a single mortal. It was rare that any mortal would do anything worthy enough for a god to consider directly punishing them. Rarer still for multiple gods to get involved in the matter, but all of them? Not even Alep had gotten such a gathering. It was unprecedented. It was only after an already long, tiring discussion on the actions of the forbidden gods and just what they'd done that things even got to that point. None in attendance denied that those who'd done something so foolish needed to die. It was an inescapable fact. Their selfish choice may have cost them the world after all. The issue was the form the execution took, namely the fact that a mortal was allowed to carry it out. It's outrageous, the god Eneth yelled, fire burning in his reptilian eyes. Not only to allow a mortal to awaken sacrilege, but to come so close to getting to the third tier as well? We need to act before he can inflict any true harm to the world. The boy needs to be banished to the infinite hells immediately. Eneth, you're just sore because he taught your child a well-deserved lesson about picking fights. Of all the summoned on this world, Ben could be said to have the greatest accomplishments by far, Analia said in his favor. Not only had he solved the issue of passive magics, he's the only reason we were alerted to this issue in the first place. The fact that he was able to use this event to strengthen himself is a boon. So long as he doesn't intend to point his fangs at us, we only have this chance to act. If he achieves the third tier, then he'll ascend to godhood when he dies and we won't have another opportunity, and we all know how appealing such a thing is to mortals. Who's to say he won't go attacking priests and burning churches to try and push it over the edge? Worse, what if he decides to attack one of us while we're descended in our believers? If he manages to become a god of sacrilege, then we might not be able to touch him as a god, instead having to live in fear of him exerting the property on us. Are all of you willing to accept that risk? Looking around, while only a few gods seemed to be explicitly on Eneth's side, many were uncertain. The points brought up weren't wrong, but to kill a mortal who hadn't truly done anything wrong yet was unreasonable. They needed mortals, while a certain level of fear was expected due to the difference in the scale of their existence. None among them were evil gods. They prided themselves on trying to be fair at the very least. The issue was that despite that, while there was only a small number in favor of banishing his soul, only a small number were speaking to his defense as well. They were in a stalemate. It all came down to who would sway the rest. It is nice to hear all opinions, of course, began one of the undecided, a god whose defining property was choice. But I believe we should listen to the one who knows him best on the matter. Myriad, since he is your apostle, what do you have to say for the boy? Now hold on. Eneth cut in. That should be obvious enough already. What point is there in dash? Ben is dangerous, the cube said calmly, having been quiet till then, thinking long and hard on what to say, bringing the rest of them to silence with his first words. The other gods around stared at him in surprise, with the ones who'd actually met Ben wondering just where he was going with it. It's no secret he doesn't attach any special meaning to gods. In fact, I'd say he has a negative impression of all of us, at least until he gets to meet and talk with us, that is. From there, his evaluation is on the level of how he would look at a person, not a power above him. Frankly, I don't think anyone here has the right to blame him for that either. We ripped his soul from his old world for our own purposes without any consideration for what to do if an individual like him were to show up, the end result being the communal church deciding on its own to help him with no input from any of us to help create a better impression. He has a second chance at life, one scoffed. Considering that, I'd say he has plenty. He was dragged back to life and immediately told that the world was in peril from a race that had killed thousands of them. He has every right to not be grateful for such a thing. Another counter. Regardless, Myriad said, pulling attention back to himself, that isn't the only thing that makes Ben dangerous. In fact, there's many. The more obvious we can draw from how easily he can kill demons is the fact that he doesn't place any special value on life. It should have been obvious from the start for anyone watching really. Unlike many of the other summoned from cultures where killing isn't commonplace, he had no issue with it from the beginning, even though he had no history of hunting like the ones that were able to quickly adapt to their new situation had. More important, though, is how he interacts with the system itself. I've checked his soul early on to be sure, but he doesn't have any natural affinity for it. Despite that, in less than 3 years since he arrived on the world, he went from level 0 and 1 skills to 3 awakened ones, with a few more already close. That isn't even mentioning his talent for jobs. Aside from the fact that he seems to constantly push himself to his limits and enjoy every second of it, he's excellent at figuring out ways to gain experience quickly. Can any of you guess how many he's gone through since coming to this world? What, maybe 10 after what he pulled by killing those gods? Try 19, Myriad told them, getting a shocked silence as a result as the gods around him questioned if any mortal had ever completed so many in such a short span of time. There were always times when a certain individual figured out a way to finish a job unusually fast, but to devote the effort needed to do that was something else entirely. Ben has a level of determination to rise to outrageous heights, and a level of indifference to the gods to make him a powerful enemy if he chooses to be, and all of this and more is why we absolutely cannot try to banish him to the infinite hells. I'd say you made a pretty convincing case for it, Myriad, Ineth said as many neutral gods gave unsure nods. If the boy is as dangerous as you say, then we'd be all the wiser to do it now before it's too late. Well, there's 2 points you need to consider, Myriad began to explain. The first is that even if Ben doesn't have a good opinion of most gods, he doesn't dislike any to the point that he'd actively attack them. Despite everything I've said, Ben's actions show his character. He's not a bad person. Even you, who went so far as to name him your enemy in a title, are at most someone who happens to be related to an idiot in his mind. Second, and more importantly though, I believe if you all try to do it then you will fail, and through the attempt you will finally register to him as people that mean him harm. He hasn't hit tier 3 yet. How could we fail? The other gods said with a laugh. Unlike some, many of us have held onto a good number of believers over the years. Even if, for whatever reason, one of us couldn't because of the strength we've lost, so long as we work together it will be child's play. Except for the change we've seen in how the system has started interacting with him as soon as he awakened the skill. When he did, his thoughts went silent to us, and his head filled with notifications, asking if he would allow every god trying to see his thoughts access by name. Tell me, all of you who would decide the fate of my apostle, if you fail, if you try to rip his soul from his body and the system stops you while telling him the names of every god who participated, how do you think he will act? The confident mood of the gods in favor disappeared as some turned to the 2 other gods who had gained access to Ben's mind. It's true, Hellori told them with a nod. And it shouldn't be particularly surprising. We've seen the system interact with some skills on significantly deeper levels than others, and now that he's at the 9th level of the 2nd tier, it would be shocking to me if we could do anything harmful to him. We aren't talking about some form of limited analysis here like so many other skills mortals get, Hellori. You're describing a built-in defense against gods. Potentially there could be attacks too, she said with a shrug. We have no clue what the limits are of this skill, and I'm personally not going to put myself on the line to find them out. The mood amongst those in favor of Ben's banishment only grew worse, as even those opposed felt horrified, though leaving them confident that they were in the right, as one muttered. How could the system allow a skill like that to exist? Can you blame it? Analia asked dryly, getting no response as she did. Anyway, this is nothing like the case of Olip. The fact that we have more gods here to discuss it than that last one is shameful. However this vote turns out, you will not find me working to punish the child. And if you all fail, we can be clear on just whose side I'm taking. A round of agreements joined her as every god whose race possessed a passive magic spoke up. All of their people had been oppressed to an extent, trapped in their lands, limits to their travel in the world, and looked at with fear where they went. It was thanks to Ben that changed, and none of them would forget that, a fact that was clear to the other gods. You would divide us during such an important time? Ineth spat. No, you would. You're the one with the unruly child and the bruised pride trying to take it out on a mortal who slighted you, Ineth, and I've already let you off lightly for what your child did to mine. Analia spoke. eyes flaring with her long thin teeth bared. "She's not your child. She's just a believer. And a particularly dangerous one at that too. Nobody but I gets to decide what my believers are to me, and I say they are my children. And if you have anything more to say about Thera, then this discussion is going to become significantly less civil, little god." The venom in her voice kept Aneth from talking back, and eventually he backed down, though not completely. "We said we'd have a vote, so let's bring it to a vote," he said, not looking at Analia and by extension avoiding the eyes of those on her side. "All in favor?" Around them all, hands and hand equivalents went up, even if it was just a projection of mana, but it still amounted to no more than a tenth total, making Aneth clench his teeth as he called out the other. "And all opposed?" If the majority of them decided to stay neutral on the matter, then it still could have potentially gone through, but it seemed that for as much trouble as Ben had caused, he'd managed to make some good impressions, combined with Myriad's warning to the other gods. With the call came 50% of the other gods taking his side, leaving 40% either neutral, undecided, or some level of indifferent as the meeting among them came to a close. "Very well. It seems we'll have to wait for him to show what a threat he is before we act then. This meeting is over." With that, each god went back to their own tasks, with Analia and Helori joining Myriad in his realm. "Just had to get the last word in, didn't he?" Helori tisked. "What an outrageous way for a god to act. He's just sore to find his church significantly poorer, as well as the fact that he's lacking in faith at the moment. He was happy to bet plenty that Ben would die in the trial after all." Analia chuckled. "An excellent reason to avoid gambling." Myriad, for his part, had already crashed to the ground, drained from the encounter. "Thank you both. Really, I don't know what I'd have done without the help." "Don't worry about it," Helori said as she began using him as a seat. "Your apostle is a bit obnoxious, but I'd be a failure as a goddess of magic and knowledge if I let a mind like that be banished for something so dumb. And I'm looking forward to having him as a son-in-law one day." Analia laughed. "Such a pleasant concept, isn't it? I'm not sure you'd think so if you saw how much stress he constantly puts me through, but at the very least, as long as he isn't doing anything worse than he usually does, things might be okay. Oh, who am I kidding? The moment that he does something to sway that 40% against him, he's screwed." As much as Myriad cared for Ben and even genuinely thought he was a good person when it came down to it, he couldn't help but think it would only be weeks before his apostle might do something to force him to reevaluate that belief all over again. He's just lucky nobody brought up how he acted at all, Faith, when he got out of the trial, probably only because it would point back to our failings that allowed him to be put in that situation in the first place. "Oh, Ben, please stop causing me so much stress." As Ben went to sleep for the night, he did so with a headache. There were just over 200 living members of the village, and from checking their skills, he couldn't help but think there was little of immediate value. They all had their blessed skills, of course, but without the cards to tell them what they were, none of them had even known they existed, meaning except for the magics, they were almost all at the Zeroth level. People had ones oriented to hunting and gathering, but not much else that could be used to help them improve their quality of life. And that's not even considering the magics either. He thought as a notification rang out in his mind. "Yes, always allow." He thought as he opened his eyes to the familiar empty space to face the floating cube, feeling the new effects that came with King of Sacrilege as he looked at him. Areas he was sure would be weak points were obvious to his eyes, even if he instinctively knew that while in his god's realm they wouldn't be able to be exploited. He shook his head, trying to filter out the effect as he did while he updated Myriad. "So I don't know if it's good news or bad news, but about a tenth of your new believers have minor soul magic as a blessed skill, with the rest having either life or death. It also looks like the gods kept the existence of space magic from them, probably to keep any from running off too. Oh, and as long as they all accept you, which I'm pretty sure most are going to do, it looks like you'll have a believer other than me with an awakened skill now." Toltho managed to awaken his stealth to invisibility, which is extra impressive when you factor in the fact that he's never taken a job or received a blessing, basically playing without any advantages other than the base system. He must be a 1 in a billion genius at it. When things calm down, I should ask him some tips on it since I've only ever gotten the 1 level. He told the cube who'd been collapsed on the ground since he'd arrived. "How were things on your end?" Well, there was a debate on whether or not you should even be allowed to exist with a nearly third-tier sacrilege skill. Lucky for you, enough gods like you enough that we were able to keep anything from happening, but please try and be a little more reasonable at least until the first wave comes and the other gods have bigger things to worry about. Wait, what? That feels like an extreme reaction. How many gods wanted me dead? A tenth were for it, with 40% being neutral, and that's because none of them want a god of sacrilege to be born. Well, except for Ineth, who I think just has a grudge against you. Not that I can say I blame him. Interesting, he said, all the while thinking on how much more dangerous and expensive the next statue would be after this one went down. Given the damage it did and the price it cost to replace, he expected it to take a while longer this time, but he knew it would happen eventually. And just for a reference, who were the ones that explicitly wanted me killed off? Irrelevant. Focus on the fact that every god with a race that has a passive magic voted for your survival along with plenty of others. Anyway, how else did the day go? There wasn't much else that happened. I spent basically the entire day talking to them mostly one-on-one, telling them all of their skills and levels while helping them decide their jobs. They have a lot to learn, but Thera's going to handle explaining the wider world to them while I try and get a few to the Zeroth level of some different crafting disciplines. They have basically nothing on that front, so I want to work on giving them the tools to start building better lives for themselves when I'm not around, though I need to work on housing and at least an introduction to agriculture too. Actually, scratch that. Sakhel and her party owe me a favor and I'm cashing it in. Tell her they're coming to take over as soon as they can. How's her spell unification coming along? She's been working hard and is an excellent mage. She should be able to manage the equivalent of 5th level plant spells. Sweet. So she can come and get them set on that front. What else? They'll need their own job crystal and enough cards for everyone here. Plus more for anyone who's born to take, 'cause it might be a while before they can be introduced to the wider world. Books and tools too. I'll give you a list to pass on to her later of titles she can take from me to bring here. It will at least give them a reference to grow from. God, am I missing anything else? Gotta say, it's nice to see you working so hard for this. I decided to help, so I'm at least going to get them set up. Speaking of, is there anything I need to do in particular that will really solidify this holy land? Gotta throw some holy water around like with the church. No, I just need a large concentration of believers in an area that no other god controls, so this is fine. Actually, your work just introducing them to jobs is already bearing fruit. There were plenty of them ready to fully convert after meeting me, but I don't think they understood that I'm not directly connected to the job system. When a few of them got skills and levels when they took their first one, I instantly received faith from them. Excellent, but on the opposite side of things, how safe would you say we are? Admittedly, sleeping here does have me a little nervous since they did watch me killing their old gods. Any chance of someone coming for revenge? I've been keeping an eye out, and while things might change eventually, I'd say you're fine for now. Most of them are more worried about interacting with each other than dealing with any bad blood with you given what happened between them, and the 4 priests other than Toltho are basically having mental breakdowns. Oh joy, so I should also work on trying to mend the community as well as making sure those 4 don't off themselves. Or maybe I could delegate some tasks to Toltho. He seems like he might try to work on the community himself actually, so that's a plus, but I'll try and see what I can do. In the meantime though, I've got plenty of time to fill till I need to wake up. Mind bringing up the summoning spell again for me? I do have to also use this time to talk to all of these people you know. It's cool. They've already met me and I'll be quiet. His god couldn't help but sigh. Ben, you're taking on too much again, and considering that some of your goals are at best borderline impossible, I'd really like to advise you against burning yourself out trying to do anything with that spell. It can't be learned. At least not in any realistic time frame. I'm doing it for my own interest, it's fine, he said as he waved Myriad off. You might as well just leave it up if it doesn't cost you anything too. Give me something to think about while I'm here. What you should be thinking about is Thera. You've just entered a romantic relationship with the woman who holds your affection, and almost immediately you're putting her in a position where she has to help you as you work with converting a newly discovered sapient race. Not the most romantic of you. You aren't wrong. I owe her one hell of a date for putting up with this, but it's not exactly something I can deal with in my sleep. Anyway, Do your work, and if you need anything from me, let me know. I'm just going to focus on this for a while. It was just before the sun rose that Ben woke up. Having ended the night in his god's realm, inspecting that overwhelming spell and chatting with the people along with Myriad, that he found Thera, as he always did when they had to sleep in close quarters, using him as a pillow. Didn't she go to sleep at the other end of this tent? It's not exactly huge, but she sure can cover her distance. Not that he minded. He gently wrapped an arm around her, not expecting any response as he did, but getting one anyway. "MMH, you're up early," she muttered. "So are you. Does that mean you actually meant to use me like a pillow for once?" "Ugh. No, I just didn't bother moving away when I woke up. I didn't sleep super well, and you're surprisingly comfortable." "Well, feel free to relax a bit. We don't need to get up for another hour or so, I think. Also, I love you." "Ha, you better. But what brought it up?" "I mean, it's just nice to say, but I've also been a little hectic since I got out of the trial. Just feel bad you're being dragged into all of this." "Well then, you can make it up to me when we're done here, 'cause God's above, I'm going to have to deal with one change you're responsible for the rest of my life. Make sure you put your best into it." "Something on your status?" he asked, feeling all sorts of discomfort as he did. He knew that something had happened with it, and they hadn't had time to talk about it before they'd gone to sleep, both too exhausted from the day before. "I don't even want to think about it." "Come on, I'll tell you mine if you tell me yours. Actually, it would be easier to just get you to read my card later. I'm not sure I remember all of the changes. It was a lot. I guess I'm going to end up telling you eventually. Charm, telekinesis, dark magic, and spirit empowering all leveled up. Plus I'm now a high spirit mage. On top of that, a title." She fell silent at that, the embarrassment of what it was killing her inside, as Ben tried to leave her more comfortable by sharing his new ones as well. "Well, if it's just one, then that's not too bad. I ended up with 5 that might get me attacked on the street again. You're cuddled up with a godslayer, madman, monster, godkiller, and threat. Are you worse off than all of that?" "Maybe. Also, 2 of those are basically the exact same." "Ha, that was my first thought too. I guess different gods must have reacted different ways to what happened. Still, titles are helpful, right? I'm sure whatever you got will have its benefits." "Maybe, but I can't begin to imagine what the benefit would be." She heaved a long sigh as she worked up her will to say it, trying to force the embarrassing thing out of her like she was ripping off a bandage. "It's Madman's lover." "Don't laugh, don't laugh, don't laugh, don't laugh. I can feel you trying not to laugh, Ben, and just be aware I'm willing to swallow us both in the earth so nobody ever finds out about this. It would let me die with a little dignity at least." Sorry. But it's not so bad, and I'm sure it will have its advantages eventually." "Sure. But will those advantages make up for having that title stuck to my soul in 1,000 years? She groaned. "I might have to explain how I got this stupid thing one day to someone whose great-great-great-grandparents haven't even been born yet. When we get back to Stonewall, you're taking me on the best date of my life to make up for this." A pretty low bar, considering that on our first official date the invasion points appeared. He chuckled. "You're right, you have to plan the best day of my life then. I want romance and the best food you can make. Also, we're dancing. Kind of sounds like you're planning the date for us." "I'm just giving you some well-advised suggestions," she said sweetly, her embarrassment from the title fading as they spoke. "It's entirely on you to decide if you're going to take them, plus you have to do other things for us too." "Ha! Okay, sounds good to me. Hopefully, I'll have someone here to replace me in a couple weeks. A month tops. After that we'll head right back to Stonewall." "Well, not right back," she said, stopping him. "There's a small detour we need to make. It might take a day or so." "Of course, what do you have in mind?" "Secret," she said, placing a finger to his lips. "I put up with your surprises, you have to put up with mine." "Hey, I forgot to ask you earlier, but what does it mean for a skill to transition?" Ben thought to his god after talking about his status with Thera reminded him of it. It admittedly seemed to be a major change given the fact that it had altered his eye color, even if he didn't end up sprouting any scales. Myriad complained. "That's going to depend on what it does for me now, doesn't it? Now come on. Tell me already, and then you can complain in my head about it for the rest of the day while I'm working." Interesting, so what does that mean for me then? I'm sorry, all I heard was the word benefits followed by a lot of words not telling me what they are. What? That was huge. So huge he almost wanted to try and level it. By just the second level of integrated demonic body, he'd have the same healing speed as someone at the 8th level of healing enhancement. More even when he considered that both partial demonic body and limit breaker had minor healing aspects to them, and that the aspects of all the skills that made it up received a minor boost. If he was to just guess that he was around a 17% increase, then if he reached the 2nd level he'd actually be just above what a 9th level healing enhancement would get him. Relax, I won't intentionally. Even I don't want to grow any more demon bits. I'm rather attached to being human. Real thankful that bit on my card hasn't changed at all. While I have you, anything about King of Sacrilege I should know about? Seeing as it made some gods think I'm better off dead and all? With that his god went silent as the crowd around him was complete, Thera standing at his side as he addressed the crowd as a whole. Alright everyone, lots to do today as we try and teach you a bit about the world, but the first thing I want to try and work on is the living conditions. First thing first, is there a reason you all live in tents? Do you do it so you can follow animals to hunt, or is there another reason? The people looked amongst themselves confused. They lived in tents because they always lived in tents. There was no other reason for it as far as they knew, nor was there another option. It was only Toltho who spoke up, explaining it as he understood from his former god. We live like this so we can run from the strange ones easier. If we can pack everything up, then it's easier to run without too many traces. Of course, that's why. No matter how used to it they were still deep in the untamed lands. Sturdy walls could be the difference between life and death if anything came into their camp, so that was a priority that Thera would be covering until they could handle it themselves. All right, you got this? Yeah. I have a bit of experience with walls while you were gone. I just might need you to fix the staff after. Will do. With that assurance, Thera walked away from the edge of the village into the woods, getting to work as she did. In an act that was far from quick but still managed to capture the attention of all those who watched as she first put her telekinesis to work, knocking down swaths of giant trees and stacking them in piles as she did so it could be used later, either as firewood or for any practice Ben needed them to do before turning to the now empty stretch of land. She used her magic to flatten it out, compressing the dirt so it was level while she raised sections of it, making very simple homes. There was nothing fancy to them. Each was composed of a simple central room with 2 smaller rooms off to the side, and all of them lacked both doors and roofs, but they were sturdy and would keep anything dangerous out while helping keep the warmth of a fire inside. She was feeling rather smug about it too. It was a brilliant example of how far she'd come as an earth mage, and turned to look to the crowd to see if there was anything else they'd need after enough structures were made for each family unit, only to see them all bowing to her with only one word on their lips as Ben tried to keep himself from laughing. Goddess! 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 Each of them muttering it again and again, none of them ever witnessing such a level of power and feeling the uncontrolled urge to pray that their gods had forced into them over the generations, much to her horror. No, 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 no. All of you stop that right now, I am not a goddess. She yelled at them as she heard it, already on edge from the title she'd gained the day before, and not wanting to risk a new one as Ben laughed to the side. I mean, it could be pretty handy though. You have to admit a title like that probably comes with some massive benefits. Yeah, but all I can imagine is trying to explain it to some elderly woman I'm 100 times older than in the future. I don't want to have to explain why I'm the goddess of the... What's their species called? Not actually sure. Hey Toltho, what are your kind called? We are the people. Neither Ben nor Thera said anything to that, both fully assuming their original gods gave them a different name but let the matter drop. I'm sure we'll see when we get the cards anyway. Hey Myriad, did you tell Sakhel yet? Any way you could talk to the god that rules Steph's nation to get them to loan her out to get them here? And get me and Thera back for that matter? I am an awakened craftsman and enchanter. I'll make them one item to the best of my abilities if they will. That's fine, just try and keep it as low as you can for me. With that quick matter thought of and done, he focused on the crowd and watched them light up with the faith they gave off as they looked to Thera with reverence, much to her discomfort. Listen, I know this is surprising, But she's really not a goddess, so it's better not to refer to her as one if you can. It's just that this world is bigger than you all could possibly imagine. You thought there were 5 gods when there's thousands and hundreds of races to go with them. It just so happens that she's from one of the particularly powerful ones. You'll be learning all about it later, or now actually. Everyone I spoke to yesterday about construction is with me, while the rest are either with Thera to learn about the world as a whole or covering hunting and gathering for everyone. Toltho, you'll be part of Thera's lessons even if you're typically a hunter. Can I rely on you to explain to my group and the others what they missed from her later? He was the only one he felt true confidence in, having seen the lengths he was willing to go to, and he got swift agreement from him. Absolutely. I shall fulfill your trust. Excellent, in that case my 5 with me. As everyone went to their respective areas, Ben got to work picking up stones to shape into tools with his material user skill, already missing Greed's buffs despite how much his mana pool had grown thanks to both the Trial and Sacrilege Awakening, all the while having flashbacks to how similar this was to what he'd dealt with in the Dryad village. They watched him as he did, thinking he was a particularly skilled earth mage from what he was doing before he turned to address them all. Okay, we're going over a lot of the basics today, and you're going to have to use some of the books that are being brought later for any more growth, but it will hopefully be enough to let you all get the Zeroth level of construction and/or carpentry before I leave. The goal of the day is doors, roofs, and windows for all the buildings, so everyone can sleep in them tonight, and I'm not going to go easy on any of you, so let's get started. The next day, Ben could see that the first group he'd worked with was exhausted. He'd pushed them for hours, giving whatever guidance he'd thought they needed to help them learn and grow, since their foundation was almost non-existent. A group that tried to leave no traces simply didn't build things to last, always looking at what could be broken down or moved instead. After pushing them, though, he left them with the simple task of trying to figure out how to construct a well on their own with as little input from him as they could manage, while he focused on trying to train up some others in a different discipline, namely both smithing and alchemy. He'd originally considered skipping these topics altogether. This deep in the woods, so far from civilization, there was no way for them to get metals to work with, meaning they probably wouldn't need it until they'd reached a point where they'd be joining the wider world. And since so many of them were life mages, they didn't have much need for potions either. But in the end, he decided to just make it a lesson they could use if the opportunity ever came up and met with the group of 5 he'd be teaching, holding an assai as he did. He had no way of knowing what their community was like before he arrived, but with 3 of them keeping a few steps away from the other 2, a strong look of distrust in their eyes, it wasn't hard to imagine that they'd been on opposite sides of the conflict he'd arrived to. Myriad, you've really got your work cut out for you. I'm here for a couple weeks. I'll do what I can, but it's not going to be enough to fix things. Tell Sakhel to work with Toltho on it when she gets here. In his heart, he gave a small apology to the Oracle for dumping so much work on her as he spoke up, getting everyone's attention. All right, all of you, I grabbed you guys for a bit of a different lesson than what you watched the others learning yesterday, since your skills are appropriate for this. If you ever get the opportunity to actually use anything I'm teaching you, you don't really have to. But it's good for some people in the village to have some idea about it. Pay attention and ask any questions you need, cause we're talking about metalwork and alchemy. He went on to explain each in detail, having to start at something as basic as what metal was, since they'd never encountered any, at least in a pure form, as well as how their skills related to it, especially their magics. From the use of fire and earth magics for any smithing to the different ways death and water magic could be used in alchemy, and even including how life and light could be used to enhance the effects of potions. He made diagrams in the dirt as he needed to get the ideas across, and made sure to mention how the earth mages among them could make similar items to what could be made in a forge, though lacking the same quality. For alchemy in particular, he tried to focus on areas it could be used that were unrelated to life magic, since those aspects would be less valuable to them, instead focusing on how it could be used to enhance any items they made or else be used in different sorts of potions, ones to enhance various attributes or restore mana, which was when he got what he thought was a most interesting question. So would a mana potion be similar to the effects of eating a mana viper? One hesitantly asked, unsure about cutting in as she did, while Ben perked up. Not sure. What's a mana viper? Just something we can eat to let us use more spells. The low ones used to go crazy for them, but they just need to be fed first to get the effect. Can you show me? With a nod, the group led him to a tent that seemed to house them specifically. pulling out a woven basket with the creatures inside. He hadn't seen them himself, but the snake-like creatures were clearly what had been used on Thera, Steph, and Wedro when they'd been captured by the demons, at least as far as Thera described them. He was looking at it in interest before the one holding it tilted their head back, putting it in his mouth and biting down on it as it still lived, a shiver going through him as he swallowed and explained. "They aren't pleasant, but they do the job. Would you like to try?" he asked as he grabbed a new one and held it out. "I think I'll take your word on it, thanks." "Okay, I think I have a bit of a picture of what went on here. Demons use their minor soul magic to change themselves into their sapient stage, so eating these must have let them use their magic longer to reach that point. They said they need to be fed first, and from what Thera told me before, these things were draining her of her mana when she had them on her. Does that mean their bodies can store the mana they absorb for a while in a way that's possible to get back? We might just have a practical lesson on our hands here. Alright, you'll all need to give me a few minutes to make some basic tools for this, but it looks like I will be having you all actually work on gaining the alchemy skill. The rest of the day is going to be figuring out what part of them actually stores mana, extracting it, determining how well it keeps and its other properties, and if there's any chance it can be collected while they're still alive. This is going to be fun." His current students looked about, unsure if they trusted his enthusiasm given how exhausted the construction team had seemed by dinner yesterday, but giving in without argument. The person before them was the representative of the one who would be their new god. They were lost enough after what had happened to their old ones. They needed to put faith in someone. After a day with the future alchemists where Ben did his best to resist the urge to completely take over the project he'd found for them, instead just gently guiding and advising them as they experimented themselves, he took some time to look at the village as a whole. The construction team seemed to be making decent progress on creating a well, and from what Thera was telling him, it seemed that lessons about the wider world were going all right, with the people of the village showing open curiosity to what lied beyond the vast woods they'd been spending their lives in. But there were the expected issues too. A divide had formed amongst them between those who tried to fulfill their previous gods' wills and the ones who'd either been in danger from them or else had tried to protect the others. Kept things tense, feeling like everyone was on the edge of exploding, and he had no clue how to make it better. But I should still probably do something before I pass them all off to someone else, he thought with a sigh. Even if his god was working on it as they all rested, that didn't mean he shouldn't do anything either, so he went to find the one person among them he thought he could ask for advice. "Hey Toltho, mind if I pick your brain a bit?" Ben asked when he found the man sitting by the fire. "Honored apostle, just tell me what I can do and I shall." "Well, first, you can call me Ben. Things vary from god to god, but Myriad doesn't ask for anywhere near the level of respect your old ones seem to have demanded, so I don't need it either. Just treat our lovely cube like a friend when you see him and things will go well. More important though, I wanted to talk to you about the strain on the village as a whole." A look of discomfort flashed across the other man's face when Ben said it. Not that it wasn't understandable. Toltho knew as well as Ben that this was going to be a long-standing issue, with the only question being how it was going to be dealt with. "I'm not sure if I'll be much help, but I'll tell you what I can." "What were you hoping to know? Things weren't like this before, right? I was kind of hoping you'd have some sort of idea on how to ease the tensions among everyone, since I'm assuming you know them pretty well." "Easier said than done, I'm afraid. It's not as if the victims don't understand. All our lives we were taught to obey our gods, that if we didn't the balance of the world would be destroyed. Until you and your gods came along and showed us the truth, it was all of us who didn't immediately give in, who had to accept in our hearts that we were going against all we were taught, maybe threatening the world in the whole for the act. For the ones who thought they were doing what was right, even if they were conflicted, well, it's no easy thing." Ben let out a tired sigh as he took a seat beside him, leaning his head back to stare at the stars. "You're all victims here. It's just a matter of how complicit any one person is. I don't suppose you've talked to the other former priests at all?" "I have. They are not in a good place, fulfilling their roles, hunting and then just hiding away. I'd say they're probably the worst off of everyone mentally." "Of course they are. Even if everyone's faith was shattered, they were the only ones talking to the gods. Maybe executing the 5 in front of them all was too much, but it's too late to worry about that now. You guys must have had issues here in the past, right? How would you deal with it before? Before all this?" Anyone who'd caused any major problems would be made to work to make up for it or put to death if they violated the rules of our gods. But I'm not sure how applicable that would be here. Ben fell silent as he thought over what the other man said. It's not perfect, but there might actually be an idea there. Impose a penance on them, huh? That might just be what these people need. What do you think about punishing them? Ben asked as he walked around the enormous summoning spell, still set up in his god's realm for him to look at. I think that it's a complex topic with no easy answer. It can't be denied that some of them are in the wrong, but can they really be held responsible for their actions after the way they've been brought up? After what all of their kind had been led to believe since they were created. And I get that, but that doesn't mean that the people that could have died because they were following their god's orders don't deserve some justice. This is an issue for their community as a whole. Just as important, how do the ones who actually tried to do some light murder feel since then? It's been a few days. They should have had time to get their thoughts in order. Complicated would be oversimplifying it. How would you feel? Some of these people went to kill their friends, Ben, their family. Being forced to confront the truth of their gods and their existence immediately after that. This whole village is a mess. Well, I'd hope I'd feel guilty. Ha! There's plenty of that to go around mixed in with everything else. Good. Then I've got an angle to work, he said happily, changing the topic before his god could worry too much over just what was going on in the depths of his apostle's mind. And how's the faith going? Gonna be honest, I was hoping to have the quest done by now. Showing how weak their old gods were and getting them to come face to face with you and all, it seemed like it would be a real slam dunk to get through it and finish up my job. Well, first, you literally completed 5 in one day, so trying to get such a big one done only days after that is ridiculous of you. But more importantly, they're still reeling from the revelations of everything they learned. Even if they don't seem too bad on the outside, don't discount their internal struggles. I've got about a third of the village right now, and I'm sure in time more will truly start to give me faith, especially once the ones I've already gotten get my gift skill, but these things can take time. Well, consider me impatient with less than a year till things get bad. Frankly, I want to complete Master Enchanter after it if I can too. How many of them do I need to go? If we get 3/4 of them, then you should be good. It's honestly not impossible it will happen before you leave, you just might need to put some work in. Well, I'll see what I can come up with, but I think things might go pretty well after today, so watch and see what your wonderful, fantastic, stress-inducing hard-working and loving apostle can pull off. I think today is going to go pretty well. His head was reeling as he woke up, an inescapable consequence of his mind skills all leveling up at once from how he'd been spending his time in Myriad's realm. Trying to understand the summoning spell was just too much, like trying to observe every room in a building at once. He'd try to keep his focus on one part for simplicity, but then he'd see that each one interacted with 100 others. It was complex, perfect, beautiful, and far more than he could handle. Just staring at it took a toll and strained his minds, and he couldn't help but worry that his god was right, that he'd never be able to understand it. But the more he thought on what he was seeing, the more he knew it didn't matter. That was a pinnacle of magic even for the gods. If he could waste away every night of his life trying to get just a glimmer of whatever truths it would contain, then it would be worth it. Most of his minds were swirling with thoughts on it in the back of his head, forming theories and considering how they could be tested. But that wasn't something for the immediate future. He was awake, and soon the rest of the village would be too. He needed to decide exactly how he wanted to play things out. By the time everyone was awake, Ben was seated in the center of the village as Toltho gathered the villagers, each of them both curious and worried about just what the apostle would have to say. He looked out over them, seeing not just the expressions on their faces he was getting used to, but the same divide between them that had been there ever since he'd arrived. Those who'd inflexibly clung to the will of their gods, even after being given such an outrageous order, and those who'd either hesitated or fought against it, not willing to commit such acts. He didn't know if what he was going to try would work, but it seemed like a start at the very least. For as long as your kind has existed, all you've known was each other. He began, speaking kindly to try to make them comfortable. This world is so much bigger than you could know after just a few days of lessons about it, with people working together and supporting each other to try and survive. In the same way, you're no different. You've all had to carefully move the village multiple times, and you did it by working together for one simple fact. It's not about the location. A village is its people. It wasn't any of you that destroyed what you had, but the dead gods who'd misled you. He looked into the crowd, trying to make them each feel like he was talking to them individually as he did, trying to get that point across before going on. But as much as you're all victims, that isn't exactly fair to all of you equally, is it? Some of you rebelled against your gods to try and do what was right regardless of what they said, and others blindly followed. I don't intend to hold any of you personally responsible, but that's what happened, and I think we can all see the cracks it's caused amongst you all, can't we? A round of nods were clear to see, mixed with many a guilty and fearful look. Those who'd attacked their friends and neighbors all understanding where this was going as they worried over what that meant for them as he continued. Still, we've all done wrong in our lives to one extent or another, and I believe that everyone deserves a path to redemption. It's just a matter of showing it's available to you if you want to take it, so I say to all of you this. If you harbor any guilt in your heart over what happened, come to me now. He held out a hand, expecting it to take a moment before any moved, but not expecting the one who took the first step as Toltho came to the front and bowed before him. I have to say, I doubt anyone behind you feels you have any guilt to make up for. I helped support the old gods of our village. Even if I turned from them in the end, that doesn't change the fact that I carry that sin, and I want to bear the consequences with the others. Ben gave him a small smile and a gentle nod as others came up behind him. First one by one, but in moments as a crowd. Everyone who'd attacked the others on the orders of their old gods stood before him as he now spoke to them as a whole. There's no easy way to say how to make up for this. You were all prepared to kill people, but I can't ask you to give up your lives for the act. Instead, you'll be using your lives for a different purpose, devoting them to the village as a whole. You'll all be worked harder than anyone else as you try to make things right. Take on extra hunting duties and whatever odd labor needs to be done, and you'll be paying with your mana too. Anywhere you can see to put in the extra work, even when I'm not here to tell you to do it, take it if it will make the village better off overall. This is to be a self-imposed punishment as anything else. You want those who you've wronged to see you're trying to make amends? Prove it with your actions. All of them bowed to him as he turned to the rest of the crowd, the greater victims in this whole thing, as he in turn bowed to them. I'm not asking for any of you to forgive them. If you can't, that's fine. All I hope is that you'll try and live in peace in spite of what happened as they work to regain whatever little bit of trust they can. It was hesitant, but slowly they began to nod and mutter their agreement, with Toltho's axe at the beginning helping to push things along. If the one that had fought the hardest to keep them safe was going to try and atone with the rest, then how could they not give them a chance? Seeing that things had seemed to work out, Ben dismissed them to their usual work or chores as Myriad spoke in his head. Yeah, of course it was. Except the part with Toltho, that's just a happy surprise. Feel like that really motivated the others. How are the results looking? Not that strange. I figured most of them would want the opportunity to try and make things right. I just offered it to them. Now Sakhel can't complain. I'm leaving her too much of a mess. Geez, alright, I won't be rude to the teacher's pet. Now come on and toss some compliments my way because I absolutely deserve them. Score. Master Enchanter, here I come. In the days since the meeting, Ben could feel the tension in the village lesson. It wasn't gone, but he no longer had the immediate fear that things might turn violent when he left, and he was able to focus on teaching them what he could, with the day prior focusing on getting a group of magic users to learn the finer points of enchanting, as well as explaining how it could be used with Connect when they'd get it. That in particular seemed to capture their curiosities, understanding that it was a way to use the skill gifted by a god, and a part of him considered teaching it to the others as well. An entire village of enchanters sounded like an excellent time to him, but he decided to leave, considering that for later in the end, and used the day for other projects, bringing Thera with him far away from the village as he did. Did we really need to go so far for this? She asked him. Flying out for half an hour is a lot of distance. What can I say? Greed got me worried with what he was saying about trying it out in the city. I don't want to risk leveling the village we just worked so hard on. If that's a real concern, then you shouldn't be opening it at all. Relax. I was told it's a repository of knowledge, so it will be fine. Probably. He kept to himself as she lowered the stone platform she'd been carrying them on to the ground in a distant part of the Untamed Lands as Ben took a seat and reached into his bag, pulling out the mythic artifact he'd gained after finishing the trial. The archive. He took a moment to admire it, dense enchantments covering the form of a book in a way he was annoyed to know he couldn't replicate but was still able to get lost in the beauty of them. As much as he personally hated the god who'd made it, he couldn't deny the skill of the work. He felt like he could have looked at the cover alone for hours, but he could do that anywhere. They'd gone so far for a single purpose, so without any more hesitation he gave in and opened it. "You think something's supposed to happen?" Thera asked him as she stared over his shoulder, seeing nothing but blank pages. "I mean, since it's a book, I kind of figured there'd be something in it, but in the end this is a magic item, so I should probably treat it like one." Hoping for something a little more interesting, he ran his mana through it as he would for any other enchanted tool, and in an instant he found himself somewhere else. Calling it a plain white room wouldn't be correct, it was more of a void. Lacking any distinction between floor and sky, the same as his god's realm, it looked like it stretched on forever with only two distinct features. A small shelf of books a little way off, with a table closer to him in front of it with two books on it, as well as what he took to be a fancy pen of sorts. "All right. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't this." He no longer had the archive in his hands, which left the uncomfortable issue of how he was going to get back. But he tried to ignore that in favor of exploring for the time being, hoping he'd figure that bit out as he learned just what the archive was for. Starting with what was closest to him, he went to the table and picked up the first book, planning to flip through it but experiencing something completely different as he opened the first page. For only a second it was blank, nothing to be seen until he felt something examining him in turn. A prickly feeling in his mind that made him jump as the page changed to a picture from his memories of the first time he'd made a resistance brace. His curiosity piqued, he flipped through to the next page, finding it contained an image of him refining the process, as well as the one after that, and continuing on from there until it got to the most recent one he'd made for Thera that was finally able to control her charm. "Interesting, but not super helpful," he muttered. He understood what it all was because they were scenes from his memory, but as a bunch of still images they wouldn't give much context if anyone else looked at it. So why did it start with that then? And is there more? He flipped to the next page, finding a picture that made him want to close up the book in annoyance. It was a scene from the trial, right as he managed to awaken his enchanting when he'd been attempting to modify the enchantments on it to keep the timer from moving. Even if it had been a point that had let him get some significant growth in the way he used his magic, it was far from a happy memory for him, with the next few pages being how he refined the process, followed by nothing. The book had taken those two things from his mind, and he had no idea why. Do they have anything in common? The second is related to Galwax, but the first isn't, so it can't be that. Is there anything else about them that's meaningful? I mean, I guess the braces were my first big discovery, and how to use the different enchanting systems together was my most recent, but actually, could that be it? Everything he'd made other than those two things had been plenty impressive, but he wasn't sure if he'd figured out anything other than those two things that anyone else could have achieved, or at least nothing as significant. That wasn't to say that the rest of his items were underwhelming, just that they were things that would be easy for anyone to manage if they had the right skills and knowledge. Creating the braces and merging three distinct enchanting systems felt different. Okay, I think I'm on the right track, but then why is it just being recorded in a series of pictures? What's the point? That was a question without an immediate answer, so instead of lingering on it he moved on to the next book, this time finding it truly empty, not being filled in as he looked. Okay, empty book and a pen beside it. This at least seems easy enough. He grabbed the pen and found two buttons on it, so he pressed one down, intending to write a note on it to see if it had any effect, only for a completely different effect to be displayed. As he moved the pen through the air, a line was formed at the end of it, both hovering in the air, as well as appearing on the blank page he was on, and he felt his eyes light up as the connection was made. Oh, this is fun. In an instant the artist in him took over as he passed far more time than he should have been drawing out a scene, choosing to represent the shop as he sketched it out in the air, making a 3D model that wasn't presented as nicely in 2 dimensions in the book as it was in front of him, but still got the idea across. Once he was done he closed the cover, seeing what he'd drawn vanished. only to reappear as he opened it to the first page again, and disappearing as he flipped to the next. He spent more time playing with that than the first book he'd gotten his hands on, learning that the second button acted as an eraser and that he could get 11 different colors from the pen depending on how much he clicked it. More than enough for him to have far too much fun with it until he finally put it down. He was sure if he didn't stop he'd lose hours to the task. So instead he forced himself to move on, switching to the final thing, the shelf in front of him. It was small but packed, a few dozens of books filling it, so he grabbed what he took to be the first of them, opening it up to see what was inside and briefly finding a picture, similar to the one that had appeared for him, though clearly of a member of Galwax's race. Before in a flash he was somewhere different again, seemingly trapped in the body of whatever the species was called with the human-like body and the head of a squid. He couldn't move the body to check his surroundings, instead being moved by it, only able to see what it chose to see with eyes radically different from his own, warping the way the world looked, at least from his point of view. From what he could tell, though, the person he was trapped in was inside a canyon. A herd of gigantic, shark-like creatures flying through the sky towards him as Ben felt the tentacles that were a part of the person's face curl up as if they were his own. It seemed like the body was in poor condition and Ben couldn't help but feel a sense of fear as the monsters came down on them, only to be distracted by a sound. It wasn't anything external though, that was obvious enough. What he was hearing was the man's thoughts in a language he couldn't understand as he began to get an idea of what was happening and why the artifact was called the Archive. In what felt like the last moment, the person he was seeing through the eyes of raised a hand in the air and cast a spell, causing the herd of beasts coming to him to crash to the ground as he passed out, presumably from mana exhaustion, letting Ben leave the page of the book. Well, I guess that's why this thing is called the Archive, but more importantly, how did he do that? Putting two and two together, it seemed like the reason the first book took scenes from his memories was so they could be viewed by others later, but that just left the question of what he'd seen. It was some sort of spell, but he had no idea for which affinity or how it was done. Superficially, it seemed like it might be related to telekinesis, but that was a difficult magic to use effectively on a moving target. Even with Thera's vast amount of mana, it was hard to use in a fight. He doubted that Galwax's race had anywhere close to her, but then that just left how it was pulled off. His gut instinct was that it hadn't been a non-affinitied magic. He had plenty of experience with that by this point, and it wasn't the same feeling he'd gotten. In some ways, it felt similar to what he felt from Thera when she used her earth magic while he connected to her, but that wasn't quite right either. With nothing else he could do, he flipped to another page, then another, and so on, seeing the days of this mystery man's life as he worked to refine the mystery spell. Each page it seemed he was better than the last, but each time he realized he was missing the most important part he needed. The context behind the spell that must have existed in the thoughts he was hearing. A context that could only be gained from a language he couldn't speak and had no way to learn since the race as a whole was dead. By the time he got to the second half of the book, he stopped entering the recorded memories, instead finding pages and pages of notes and characters. He couldn't read that appeared in the air before him like the book he'd drawn on, but that was no help to him either. A dead language with a lost writing system couldn't only give him so much. Not letting himself be dejected despite the limited nature of what he could hope to learn, he put the book back where he found it and moved on to the next, finding a different mage in a different place than any he'd seen previously as they worked on and refined their own magic. Seemingly more familiar than the first as it was used to raise a field of crops and pointed to the plant magic he was acquainted with before moving on to the next book and the next, until he had to admit the truth to himself. As interesting as the idea of trying to figure out the finer points of the spells each book held was, it was going to be a dead end. After all, I can't spend who knows how long trying to decipher an entire language, can I? There's way more important stuff to do. I'll flip through all of these eventually to see if anything interesting pops up that I can actually figure out. But for now, the drawing feature is plenty to get some good use out of, even if it feels a little underwhelming for a mythic item. I guess all that's left is, hopefully that. He turned back to the first desk, hoping to find something he missed to tell him how to get out of there, and immediately saw what he needed. Or at least he hoped so. Behind where he first appeared was a doorway uncomfortable similar to those that connected sections of the trial, and with no other option he walked through, finding himself back where he was when things started. Out in the woods. Thera in front of him with a look that quickly changed to relief. Gods, don't scare me like that. I almost ripped it from your hands when you just zoned out for a minute. What happened? Oh man, this thing is actually pretty cool. I mean, that shouldn't be shocking, but... Wait, what do you mean a minute? As far as he could tell, he had interacted with it for around an hour while he experimented to try and figure it out. But as Thera told him it meant exactly what it sounded like, he couldn't help but view the archive with fresh eyes as he understood the implications. He'd gained an artifact with a massive time dilation effect, and he was going to be sure it saw all kinds of use. Okay, this is incredible, but I can study it more later. Gotta work on the next thing first. Reaching into his bag, he pulled out his knife he'd used when killing the forbidden gods, stripping it of its enchantments before going through his packed rings. He had so many by that point that soon enough he would have to rethink how he organized them, though that would be a later issue. For the time being, he grabbed the main two he'd need. The beast form one he'd copied from Raylia, as well as the one new one he'd made while in the village, Minor Soul Magic. While his knowledge on it was more geared to how it acted as a third-tier skill, since he'd had no clue it could exist in the first before they'd come to the woods, he had a good enough idea from that, as well as talking with the villagers who had it, on what sorts of spells could be used with it. And since it was available to him, he was going to happily use it, incorporating the magic into the design he'd been planning for so long to make use of the beast form skill. Taking those two rings, as well as the life and death ones that constantly had a place on his fingers, he blended the enchantments for all of them, altering the ratios of what went into it each time he did as he made his rings of it, laying them down to interlock and braid around each other, putting his unique system of enchantments to work until he had the item exactly as he wanted it. He'd still need to test it to see if there needed any adjustments, but that was coming as he pulled out his used-up soul crystals. Let's see, I probably shouldn't use the one that has a bunch of offsowls in it, not sure how that would turn out. As for the ones I used when killing the forbidden gods, hey Myriad, what's the odds I trapped the souls of those gods in these? He was almost certain he had. His sacrilege was telling him as much when he looked at it, with the soul crystals he'd used on them seeming starkly different from the others, but it never hurt to confirm. Interesting, and just hypothetically, between you and me, nobody else has to know, what do you think might happen if I try and use the soul of a god with the beast form skill? His god told him bluntly, sounding exceptionally tired as he did. Don't let evil gods into my body. Gotcha. In that case, is there anything I can actually do with these, or are they just fancy decorations at this point? If the body of a god is as useful as you made it sound, then the soul has to be good for something, right? Well, aside from this, what can I use souls in general for? I'm sure there's some applications that would translate extra well to the soul of a god. He'd spent so long on the topic for his few goals. Until then he hadn't even noticed how narrow his focus had been. But now with souls in hand, he wanted to know just what applications they could be put towards. Applications his god had no interest in sharing. Come on. Give me something, I won't tell on you. Very lame, but it does give me an idea. If I could hypothetically find a way to permanently bind them to the souls of people, could the same sort of change the Nawal went through take place? Basically making a semi-divine race as a whole? It seems like having a god descended on you lowers your fertility, but what if that god was actually a part of you? Do demigods have less children as well? That's weird. I didn't hear an actual answer to my question. Okay, but you keep going on about how out of the norm I am for that, so it could be handy if applied. I wouldn't exactly want to test it on myself, but it's an idea to look into, especially for the long-term potential. If I can find a way to bind a god's soul to someone so they have control and they're able to keep passing down the trait like the Nawal, then we'd have the potential for a very interesting future for the world. Hey, this could be used to save the world too if it's done quickly enough. Besides though, I'm not sure if I even could do anything like this. I don't think it would actually be possible to do it with an enchantment, which means I'd need to figure it out as a spell and then get one of the soul mages to do it instead. Or maybe it could be managed as a ritual. That might actually be easier. Myriad was quick to point out in an effort to distract Ben as he started thinking about just how exactly a ritual like that would be pulled off. Yeah, it's just an idea anyway, not a serious thing to look into. Yet, if you won't tell me any ways I can use the souls I worked so hard to figure out how to store, then what about telling me how the bodies of the demons they were wearing are used? Just what's so handy about the flesh of a god? Consider me on my best behavior, he thought, trying to get across as much sincerity as he could. But while on the topic, you've got to teach me how those potions are made. It's for my intellectual curiosity. Just 'cause I won't get to make them doesn't mean I won't be able to learn anything from the process. You're the best." His conversation done, he put aside the crystals that were almost certain to contain God's souls. Instead, grabbing one he was sure only possessed that of a single demon, placing it into the slot in his knife. "Are you sure about this?" Thera asked him, looking exceptionally unconfident as he held it. "I'm sure it will be fine. If I prove this is viable, then maybe I can talk the gods into letting me make more with some more useful creatures without wanting to toss me into hell for it. Imagine getting a beast form skill with something like a Leviathan attached. Just gotta prove it could actually be useful first." With that, he ran his mana through it, activating the enchantment and slowly feeling its effects. Considering both his resistances and his skill that would be fighting against it since the magic of the enchantment was activating on him directly, he didn't have the immediate effect he'd expected. But after a few moments they could both see the change. Starting at his fingers that grasped the handle, his flesh morphed to the red scales of a demon, creating a painful itching sensation as it continued on up to his elbow as he broke into a grin. "I'd call that a success," he said happily, feeling thrilled to have gotten the enchantment right on the first try. "Now just to see what it's good for." Actually, I didn't stop to consider what it might be good for, did I? Put all my focus on just figuring out how to make it work. Dash. Oh, that's probably not a good thing. On second thought, let's quit now and, also not good. Thera, I might need some help. He couldn't cancel the enchantment. The hand that held the knife was grasping it tightly, forcing mana into it against his will and wouldn't drop it to break him off from the effect. He'd completely lost control of the limb and with no other choice, tried to pry his fingers from it with his other hand, only for it to react badly. Showing a level of strength greater than he normally possessed that could only have come from the effects of the beast form skill being applied to him, the arm wielding the knife ripped away from the one going at it, and either by accident as it flailed about randomly, or as an intentional attack, it stabbed into his stomach, his grip on it only ending as Thera reacted with a spell, a large rock flying from the earth, smashing his fingers and making the item fall to the ground as the effect of it faded, the scales that sprouted returning to regular flesh in the process. The moment it fell, Thera rushed to him, kicking the knife away as she placed a hand on the wound to his gut, focusing her life magic there as she made him lie down before moving to his mangled hand while he tried to laugh it off through the pain, not thinking about the 2 levels he'd gained far too quickly. "All right, let's mark down using the soul of a creature with soul magic as not one of my best ideas." The notification went off in her head as she played the small flute Ben had made her while listening to her various students follow along. At a couple weeks after arriving, she'd long taught them all what she viewed as being most relevant for them to learn, meaning that aside from the few projects Ben got her to help with, she didn't have much else that needed doing. Originally, that had left her plenty of free time that she put towards both training her magic and offering pointers to anyone who had access to the same branches as her, leading to her casually talking with them all and coming to fully accept something that she had struggled with in the beginning. The fact that everyone there was really just people. Knowing their relationship with the demons as a whole had left her feeling conflicted, but that had passed as she taught them various lessons, with her discomfort slowly being replaced with the knowledge that they had been wronged. It wasn't just that they had been created to be no more than an easy and disposable source of faith for their old gods. It was also due to the lives they'd had to live because of them. She was well aware that some gods in the world had rules that they personally advised their followers to try and stick to, but what the forbidden gods had enforced just to keep from being discovered was too much. They hadn't been allowed to create anything that could be left being and found, hadn't been allowed to explore the woods that made their home beyond what they needed to for foraging and hunting, and most horrifying to her, hadn't been allowed to make music for fear of the sound carrying and drawing in curious ears. Knowing that she'd set out to rectify it, having Ben make woodwind, string, and percussion instruments for them to play with as she demonstrated what she could and led them in lessons. At this point it was mostly just the children, though a few adults stepped in now and then to learn, and it wasn't unusual to hear the sounds of people practicing late into the night. With her level up though came the end of practice for the day as she smiled at them, trying to do better at handling the children than she usually managed. "That was great work, everyone. I'm sure you'll all be making your own songs before you know it." For now, go have some fun before dinner time. Okay? Getting a round of yes and wide smiles, they ran off to do whatever caught their attention as she let herself relax. Any day now, Sakhel and the others would be arriving, and as much as she wanted to go home after so much time away, there was one other thing she'd need to do first, as much as she wished she could avoid it. Unfortunately, Ben just had to keep getting into situations like this. She thought as she shook her head. As if managing to get partially possessed and stabbing himself wasn't bad enough, he'd also leveled up that skill twice. It hadn't resulted in any visible changes the way his eye color had. But the name alone told her there were things going on she couldn't see. Integrated demonic body, it was clear enough something was happening to him at a deeper level, and she wanted some idea of what the endpoint would be. I'll just need to deal with it, she told herself as she walked through the village to find him. In the time they'd spent there, it had grown considerably. No longer just the houses she'd made the walls for. All of them were now equipped with doors, windows, and roofs, with the construction team having set up a well nearby. Beyond that, though, was the large wall she'd had to put up around the village as a whole. It wasn't a huge defense, any of the adults would be able to see over it without a problem, but they were in the middle of the untamed lands. Monsters and beasts of all sorts lived there, and even that minor bit of extra protection would help them in the long run, at least for as long as they stayed out there. It was as she got to the other end of the village that she found Ben, where he was supposedly working on his last big project for them, but instead being distracted by all of the children she'd sent off to play earlier, carrying them on his shoulders and running across a bed of stone in an empty pit in the ground that had previously been an empty field, with all of the dirt in it moved to the side to be put back later. She watched him silently for a moment, finding the scene charming, even as her old worries came to mind. What if whatever changes were happening could hurt him? What if someone else saw his skills and he was attacked for them? What if? Stop thinking about it. She had already decided that she wouldn't worry about the future. She just wanted to enjoy the time she had with him now. But that didn't just make her concerns vanish, and Ben certainly didn't make such a task easy on her. It seemed like every few weeks he just had to do something that would be a problem down the line, not to mention the constant issue that was his lifespan. It was obvious loving him was going to set her up to be hurt in the end. But as he turned and saw her, his face breaking into the happiest of smiles, she couldn't help but smile back. She didn't know if she'd really made the right choice, but this was the one she wanted. He put the kids down and climbed out of the pit, picking her up and spinning her around in his arms after rushing to her, joy pouring from him as he did. "Good news, I take it?" she asked as she looked down at him, still in his grasp. "Completed my quest and my job with it. You're now looking at a master enchanter. Oh man, I can't wait to start putting this to use too. So much to learn, so much to do." Ahem. Are we maybe interrupting something? A familiar voice asked from the side, making it clear that the people they'd been waiting for had finally arrived. Will gave them a wave as Steph ran over to them, wrapping them in a hug, with Sakhel and her party standing behind them. Ben put her down and she did her best not to be mortified that people she knew had just seen them like that as the rest made their way over too while Ben spoke to her. "All right, since it looks like we can leave, I'll just need to finish up here. Sorry, Thera. Can you put the dirt back into the pit? Just try not to knock down any of the poles at the sides, please." All around where Ben had been working, a few stone pillars were jutting out of the ground and she did her best to avoid them while filling it in, as he explained just what the point of that all was for Sakhel. "All right, so I have a plant magic enchantment down under there, so I was hoping to use this area as a field. Did you get all the seeds?" "Yep. So I just need to grow a few outside of there to see what will work best in these woods first, right? Right. After just take them through the finer bits of agriculture. You can always reach out to me if you need anything, but they've already been taught how to activate it and they know who among them has the role. Anything you need to know otherwise. I wouldn't mind knowing why we had to come do this," Sko asked, getting a blank look from Ben. "Because you guys owed me a favor and I said so. Also, too many people currently think I'm dead, so I don't want to waste more time not correcting them of that. Before I run off, where did you put everything?" "Nowhere," Steph told him. "It's all in my storage. Where should we leave it?" "I'll show you where in town. We have a building set up for everything. Come on." As they went to drop things off, they asked the villagers to gather for them and spread the word to the others, and they all met in the center with the crowd quickly formed to hear what he had to say and find out about the new strangers in their lands. Ben was quick to tell them about Sakhel and her party, how they'd be staying with them for a while to help however they could and teach some things she and Ben couldn't, and at the end brought Toltho up front. Now, I know this might seem a little freaky at first, but it's not a big deal, and it will make it easier for you to keep track of things for your status. Just prick your finger and place it on the card. There's enough for everyone. The former priest nodded and did as he was asked as both Thera and Ben leaned in to look at what it would say, filled with curiosity about what it would show that couldn't be found out when connecting to them. In all, it was a fairly standard status. Resistances below 10 and decent affinities, all things considered, putting him in the high teens and low 20s for almost everything. It was just one thing that was obviously problematic, making the two of them silently look to each other, neither sure what the consequences would be if the village they'd come to know ever had to join the wider world and word got out that, as far as the system was concerned, their species was listed as demi-demons. After saying their goodbyes on a more individual level, Will and Steph took them back to the closest gate over the course of a few hours, using the time to fill them in on all that had happened in the few weeks since they left All Faith. By the end of it, Steph was shaking Ben in exasperation, unable to believe how he kept walking into different problems, but eventually they parted ways, going through their home gate and leaving the two of them alone. "All right, where to now?" Ben asked, not forgetting that she said there was something they needed to do. "Back to Analia first? Pick up the cart and be on our way. We'll leave the cart. Hopefully this will only be a few hours," she said as she grabbed his hand, pulling him along to a gate she never wanted to bother going through. It was one of the few that had guards stationed on the outside, both to keep anyone from going in accidentally, as well as keep anything dangerous from getting out. As much as she hated it, they would be entering the Life Valley to see the great life spirit, her Aunt Vividus. Is this okay?" he asked her as he understood what they were doing. "Didn't you say before that it's dangerous to go through here? As long as we're only here for a day, we'll probably be fine. We need to get you checked out, and unfortunately, there probably isn't anyone better suited for it than her. Look, I know the skill sounds bad, but I feel fine. Besides, I dealt with bacteria and fungus growing across my flesh during the trial, not in a huge rush to repeat it. Ben, I'm worried about you, so I need you to do this for me. Trust me, I have no interest in being here either." She looked at him, filled with an earnest desire that he be okay, and whatever small amount of opposition he had to the idea crumbled. "Okay, I guess a day isn't too bad. Where do we need to go?" I'm not actually sure." It was her first time there, and she didn't know much about the area. Looking around, they were in the heart of a dense forest, with the peaks of the Death Mountains just visible in the distance through the trees. Around the gate was quiet enough, but she knew better than to let her guard down. From what she understood, this land was basically her aunt's playground, and she didn't want to know just what sorts of things she kept there. Seeing no obvious signs of where to go, she briefly thought of leaving to get her father to help lead the way, only to stop as she saw a life spirit floating by. "Excuse me, could I bother you to guide us to Vividus?" she politely asked, getting a positive response as she did. "Ah, Earthkin. Of course, follow me." She hadn't been expecting such a positive response from the spirit, but word about her had been going around amongst them in a way it never had before. The fact that she could replenish their mana elevated her to all of them, changing her from someone who had a connection with Abris they couldn't quite understand to something else entirely. They were led through the woods, no path to use since the concentration of life mana there would leave it overgrown in days or weeks, while she stood at the ready with her staff in hand. She knew the area was known for its dangers, but as the woods gave way to a small town, they'd encountered none of them. It seemed like far too peaceful of a trip, but that thought was quick to vanish from her head as she saw what was on the other side of the town and was clearly their destination. "Gods above, Viv, why are you like this?" she muttered to herself as she saw the castle that towered into the sky. Perhaps she shouldn't have judged too much. The home she'd grown up in herself was of a ridiculous size as well, but it also served the purpose of handling her mother's government affairs. This just seemed needless. They made their way through the town at a quick pace, ignoring the people they passed as they did. It was mostly just groups who found it easier to live near vast swaths of life mana for one reason or another, with life affinitied fairies flying amongst them all until they reached their destination, with Thera taking the initiative to bang on the front door. They waited and waited, getting no answer as she tried again. It was understandable that it might take time for someone to get there considering how big everything was, but after half an hour of knocking she gave up and let herself in, finding a wide entry room, filled to the brim with sculptures and other decorations. Ben gave her a look that she shrugged off. She's the one who said to come if anything changed with you, and she knows we can't stick around here. If she's unhappy, she can deal with it. Not exactly the most respectful stance, but it's no matter, Vividus said, appearing at the top of a large stairway with what seemed at first glance to be an incubus by her side. Thera, I wasn't expecting your visit. Aunt Vividus, Uncle Knox. I wouldn't be here if I could avoid it, so why don't we get this over with? You said to come here if anything changes with Ben, so we're here. She cast a look to him as she walked over. Whatever was on the life spirit's mind impossible to tell due to the shape she took. While she chose to match the form of a succubus as many of the other great spirits had after her father started to, she still looked like a white void beyond the basic outline. It was impossible to tell her thoughts from any sort of expression if she didn't go out of her way to create it. Without so much as touching him, she eventually switched her focus, staring into Thera. So what level is your life magic these days? I don't see what that has to do with anything. You came to me for help. You can answer the question. TCH, it's level 9. I believe I told you to come to me at the 6th level. And I believe I had better things to do. So are you going to actually look at Ben or not? The great life spirit stared at her for a moment longer before turning and waving for them to follow. Knox, it seems I'll be busy for a while. If you'd come back in a few days or so, we can continue our work. They walked through a number of halls, each decorated in a way to seemingly show off wealth or power, and she couldn't grasp why. Spirits didn't care for such things, and as annoying as her aunt could be, she didn't think she was different in that regard. Luckily, Ben had the same thought and had no problem voicing it. Quite the big place you've got here. Is there any reason you need so much space? Unlike how she would have asked it, he spoke with only polite curiosity, and it seemed that was enough to get an answer. You mortals tend to value it, and it makes negotiating with them significantly easier. Anyone who comes here already knows I'm more powerful than them, but something like this conveys that I have more resources as well, even without having to say it. Having a quick mental victory typically makes things smoother later on. How delightfully manipulative, Thera muttered. I'll do what I need to accomplish my goals. Now come here and take a seat, she told them as they were led into what looked like a guest room. Thera was pointed to a chair while Ben was told to take off his shirt and lay on the bed right before Vividus plunged her arms into his chest the same way she'd done the last time, only for her voice to take on a sound of something other than dismissal. She spoke with a touch of surprise. Were you tortured recently? What? No, Ben told her, before thinking a little more. Actually, maybe I kind of was. Why? Your body's a mess. There's signs of you being healed multiple times, as well as a level of strain that I'm not used to seeing. So was I not healed properly? You were, but it's like you were scarred on a cellular level. Give me a moment, she told him, focusing for just a few seconds, and Thera felt the prickly sensation of the room filling with mana, even as she sat a few feet from them, and fixed, though from the looks of things that wasn't the actual reason you came here. What caused the change to your body, or should I say your demon organs in particular? Ah, it's a funny story, he said with an awkward laugh, briefly explaining all that had happened from his skill transitioning to getting it to the 3rd level. By the end her aunt seemed shocked, a fact that would have amused Thera plenty if she didn't agree so completely with the sentiment. To be clear, you took a job you knew was connected to your demon organs, and then after linked yourself to a demon soul? I feel like you're missing some nuance. He tried to argue in his defense as Thera shut him down. No, she's not. So how much of a problem is this? Hard to say. It's obvious that this has gone far beyond how I'd adapted them to him. I'll need to look your pet over in more detail. It might take a week or so. What? Vividus, you know we can't stay here for a week. I'd rather not die of a bacterial infection or something from just breathing the air too long. I'll make arrangements for a different place to examine him, so for now just stay the night. A single day here won't kill you, and I'll check you both in the morning. I'll have some food sent to the room later. Wait, are you expecting us to stay in the same room? Is that an issue? I've been led to believe you will be joining your life with him one day. That's just something Mom forced on us. Oh, then is there another reason the microbiome in his mouth more closely resembles yours than the last time I examined him? Ah, what? Why do you dash? It seems like one room will be fine. I'll have a meal sent here later, so for the time being make yourself comfortable. With that she left, leaving Thera frozen with no idea how she was supposed to react to that, as she eventually defaulted to throwing her hand over her face. Gods above, I hate her so much. Eventually, they heard a knock on their door as their meal arrived, though in a way neither of them would have anticipated. Plates were stacked on the wide flat back of a six-legged creature that walked in as soon as they opened the door for it, making it perfectly clear that they were supposed to treat it as a table to be used. Okay, even for me this is a bit messed up, Ben muttered as he stood by it to begin eating, Thera seeming much more hesitant. There's no way this thing is natural, right? Absolutely not. I've only seen a few of the things she's made, but in the past they at least seemed practical. I can't begin to guess what the point of this thing is. Maybe another way to shock guests? Or maybe she really does just think it's useful to have a moving table. Either way, the food isn't bad, so you should have some, he told her as he munched away, though unable to keep himself from a single bit of curiosity as he reached down to touch the beast. As odd as it had been to realize that he didn't practice his connect with many animals, it wasn't exactly unexpected either. He kept no pets and didn't know anyone who did, and the creatures they hunted were typically dead by the time he got his hands on them. Still, it showed a very clear hole in the way he trained his skill, especially since his goal was to awaken it, so taking the opportunity in front of him he did just that, linking with the creature to see what was within only to find nothing. When he'd connected to the obels, even if he didn't feel distinct skills the way he did with people, he'd at least felt something, but that wasn't the case here. It was like the creature was empty, nothing to grab onto. That didn't mean connecting to it was pointless, though, as a far more unexpected effect came through as he found himself seeing through the creature's eyes and experiencing its other senses. It was just like when he'd experienced it in the trial of Analia, maybe even to a greater degree. He hadn't been able to think with its mind the way he had when he'd connected to the copy of himself, but in exchange he could tell instantly that for as long as the connection held, he could move the creature's body to his whims as its eyes shot around to examine the room under his will, moving its feet up and down as Thera jumped back, not trusting any creature her aunt created. Sorry, that was me, he admitted, breaking the connection and making it go still once again. I just wanted to check something. But this thing is, well, it's real weird on the inside. I'm sure that would describe anything Vividus makes, she said dryly, already feeling sick of being there and dreading the idea that they had a week to go. Still, a week was a small price to pay to learn what Ben's skill was doing to him. Anyway, I'm already exhausted, so I'm going to turn in. Sounds good. I need to talk with Myriad, so I guess I will too. Want me taking the ground? They'd been forced to share quarters for a lot longer than either of them had planned these last few weeks, and since she tried and failed to get a second room, he didn't want to leave her uncomfortable. However much they cared for each other, the romantic aspect of their relationship was still new, and he had no interest in rushing things when he got the impression she'd rather take things slower. Despite that, she shook her head, pulling him along and resting her head on his chest as he went to rest. I'm not making you sleep on the ground, just don't get used to this yet. I'd never hear the end of it from Auntie if she ever found out. Works for me. With that, he wrapped an arm around her and closed his eyes, forcing himself into Myriad's realm. Sup Myriad, your favorite mortals here to oh, hey Hellori, he said in greeting, seeing his god wasn't alone. Hope I'm not interrupting. As with any time he went to his god's realm and found her there, she was using his favorite cube as a seat, leaving him unsure of just how he should be reacting and ultimately settling on ignoring the act altogether, minus the minor curiosity of how comfortable his god was. I heard that, and testing it out won't get you to the third tier of sacrilege, so don't even try. Hey! I wasn't even considering the sacrilege angle, although now that you mention it dash. So what brings you here today, Ben? His god asked, forcibly changing the topic. Oh, you know, this and that. Connected to a creature that the great life spirit made. Pretty sure it doesn't have a soul. Was wondering how that works. It was Hellori who answered, doing her part to fulfill the role she'd agreed to in answering all of his questions. It's likely a homunculus, a form of artificial life. The way they're made typically doesn't result in an ensouled creature. In fact, that would be an undesirable outcome since it would make it harder to obey orders. Neat. How hard would it be to make one of these things? For you? Impossible. You usually need an awakened life magic to have a chance, and even then it isn't quick with lots of potential for failure. Typically, only the longer-lived races bother to make them so they can use them for basic work and chores, but any shorter-lived race would be wasting too much of their time trying to get it right to make it worthwhile. Of course, there is also the option of just buying one to use, though it will still have the basic requirements of any living thing, so it's not necessarily worth the effort. Seems like it would be easier to just hire a servant in that case. Having one can act as a way of showing off the maker's skill in magic, or the owner's wealth to be able to afford one. Besides, they have other uses too. You're basically one yourself. Hellori, you can't tell me that and let it hang. I'm gonna have an existential crisis. What does that even mean? Exactly what it sounds like, though it's not a big deal. You were already aware, even if you didn't think of it in those terms. The life gods made you a new body, a vessel without a soul, just like any other homunculus. It was just a place to bring yours when you were brought to the world. It's no big deal. At the very least, if you weren't bothered before about having a new body constructed, you shouldn't be bothered now. When she put it that way, it did seem significantly less worrying. She was right after all. He was fully aware this wasn't the body he was born with. It was just something about hearing it in the terms of being a homunculus that made it feel off-putting. But it was a minor feeling and easy to ignore. Okay. Interesting to know, I guess. Going to do my best to not think too hard on that and move on. Myriad. How do I awaken Connect? Same way you awaken any skill, by pushing it beyond its limits. Just keep working at, and if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. I was kind of hoping for some more solid suggestions than that. I'm already starting to make it to middle ultra rare with my stuff occasionally. Think of what I could do if I had more awakened skills to work with. Ben, you're the first person in the world to even get this skill. How am I supposed to offer you suggestions when nobody's awakened it before? That is an excellent point. Damn. It just feels like I should have it by now, you know? The fact that it didn't merge with either crafting or enchanting when they awakened is a huge disappointment. That one is likely to give you some trouble, Hellori told him as she thought it over. When a skill awakens, it will typically merge with other skills to lower the boundary. Even if it's in a small way, your skill interacts with souls, meaning that the easiest way for it to awaken would be if you had life or death magic to merge it with. Actually, dark would work too since it has mind aspects to it. The fact that you can't gain any of those is likely what's holding you back. It's the same issue for Zandale. He's been on the edge of awakening his skills for years, but he has no affinity for the two magics that might help tie all of his skills together and push him over the edge. So if I want to make it easier, then I need either another soul or mind skill that it could work with. But where would I? Wait, Zandale has empathy. Myriad, what are the odds you could set me up with a meeting with him sometime soon? Whatever his price, I'll pay it. It was a non-affinitied mind magic, his only option, but immediately he felt like it would do the job. He was sure if he got that and put a couple months towards raising it a couple levels, it would be exactly what he needed to make it work. But unfortunately for that idea, his god shot it down immediately. Zandale and his apprentices are basically booked full for the next few years. With the invasion months away, everyone wants to help ensure their best warriors get whatever edge they can. Ugh. Don't tell me that means that if I want to get it, I need to train for it myself? That's exactly what it means. Sorry, Ben. If you want, I can still book you an appointment with him. But the world might have ended by then. Well, book it if you can then. I'd rather have it and need to pay for a random skill than need it and not have it around. I was floating around the idea of helping him get the bestowal skill so I could take it for myself after, so if I don't need empathy then that's still on the table. For now, should I even try to get empathy just by practicing? Non-affinity magics are so hard to get I might actually manage to awaken connect before I could get it, but on the other hand, it's not like it would be a huge loss to use a mind or two to focus on getting it in the back of my head constantly. Of course, on the other hand, it would still cost me mana to practice it, which could definitely be put to better use towards trying to raise my material user skill, and there's really no time I could try to gain empathy that I couldn't be training that instead. It was a tough choice, but in the end he decided to mentally mark it down as not a priority. As much as he wanted to do whatever he could to awaken his connect, it wouldn't be worth it to try and gain the skill in favor of ignoring his other valuable ones. If he ever found himself with time to put towards it he would, but otherwise he'd do the best he could to keep pushing the limits of his skill as it was to try and break through. It wasn't like he didn't have other ideas he could use in the end, so once they were all used up he would re-examine the prospect of training to get empathy then. Was that all you needed? Hellori asked him. I was in the middle of something with your god after all. Why Hellori? Is that any way to talk to your favorite student? Ben asked, grabbing his chest and feigning hurt. You aren't my student. I mean, you agreed to answer all of my questions for me, so I kind of am actually, but whatever, I'll wear you down on that eventually. Just one more thing before I stick to the summoning spell. How would I go about decoding a dead language? He'd thought long and hard on whether it would be worth his time to try to figure out how to decipher the thoughts in the books he'd gone through, and in the end decided it would be worth it, if only because of the time dilation aspect of the artifact. He was pretty sure that when he used it time seemed to move around 100 times faster compared to the real world, and while that had plenty of benefits for making and refining ideas in general, it also meant that there was no loss for trying to actually learn the language of Galwax's race as a whole. It wouldn't be an easy task. Ben only knew English and world speak, with the second being downloaded into his brain by the system, but there was no way around it if he wanted to exploit all that the artifact had to offer. He could tell from the look in her eyes that Hellori was instantly more interested in the conversation. Exactly the response he was hoping for. As a goddess of knowledge, how could she resist trying to learn about the mysteries of a dead world? As much as Ben hated Galwax, even he couldn't deny his own curiosity on the matter. The study of language is basically non-existent on the world because the system gives everyone world speak, so learning others is something of a lost art. I believe there's a god of poetry who should have a decent idea of language as a whole, but if we were to set up a meeting we should start you with a better foundation than the one you currently have. You should learn a few new ones to figure out what you can and we'll go from there. That doesn't sound like a bad idea. But there's only one language on the planet. How should I learn more? What, do you think your god and I forgot the languages of our homeworld just because they aren't spoken anymore? While I can't speak for myriad, I know thousands. We'll both pick out some diverse ones for you and get you started. I might be able to get some different gods to teach you some of their own later too. There's plenty up here who lament the loss of their people's tongues, even if it was for the purpose of unifying the world as a whole. After a quick discussion between the two gods where Myriad was kept from giving any argument to Hellori in the face of her interest, they both selected one and began teaching him at the same time, taking advantage of his many minds as he focused and listened to them while at the same time continuing his examination of the summoning spell, hoping that something there would finally click as he pressed himself to learn. They were awoken the next day by a knock on the door from another one of Vivduz's creatures, and were motioned to follow it down to the main hall where the great life spirit was waiting, another monster standing beside her. With a head as big as any of them were tall and little in the way of any sort of body to go with it. Thera couldn't help but think the creature's existence was pitiful. It looked like the majority of it was just a mouth, no facial features beyond that, and dozens of tiny limbs to carry itself with. She couldn't begin to imagine the point of it, but assumed she would soon as she focused on her aunt. All right, so where are we off to then? She asked, not having the will to be patient. Just being close to her aunt was aggravating her, like she was constantly being pricked at, and there was nothing she wanted more than to finish their business there as fast as possible. Her aunt seemed to be of a similar mind as well, and without a word tapped the beast to her side, its outrageously large mouth opening as it activated a spell within it. A hole in space appearing in its jaws that Vividus stepped through. Casting a quick look between each other, they hesitantly followed, finding themselves in a land of snow and ice, freezing temperatures chilling them to their cores with the only sign of anything else around being another outrageous mansion amidst the tundra. Her aunt headed right to it, clearly expecting them to follow, which they did, the only other option being to suffer through the snow and cold. But as they walked, she shot one final look back to the portal they'd come through, instantly regretting it as she did. Whatever the creature that made it was, it had still existed on the opposite side of it, and with the hole through space being squarely in its mouth, it seemed like there would be no way for it to come through, but the solution to that seemed as creative as it did disturbing. Thera caught sight of what looked like flesh and organs squeezing their way through the hole as it turned itself inside out to make its way through, the portal vanishing as it did before it righted itself and followed its maker. I already regret seeing that, not sure I want to know what we'll be witnessing next. It seemed like another area that her aunt had a home set up in, so she braced herself as she went through the door, only to feel a bit of relief up seeing it was as normal as the last building had been. The entire place seemed to be made of wood, but there was some sort of heating going on that kept it significantly more comfortable than the outside as they were led through it. I'll show you both your room later. Since the examination will take place over the span of a few days, I'm sure you'd prefer a bit of enrichment so you can help yourself to the library while you're here. Just this way. The room they were led to was large, not as much as any time they'd been to the Craftsman's Guild, but with a big enough selection that Thera knew she'd never be able to make it through everything in their time there, though given all the mind skills he had she couldn't be sure of the same for Ben. More interesting to her was just how filled the room was with life spirits. They both went in, though Thera was stopped by her aunt's firm grip as Vividus spoke to Ben. Read whatever you want while the life spirits in the room examine you. We'll be back later. Thera, with me. What? Why? At the 9th level of life magic. I'm not letting you miss the opportunity to learn from me, whether you like it or not. Argue and you'll find out nothing of what's happening to the boy. With that, she started walking off, fully expecting to be followed as Thera glared at her from behind. The only thing that seemed like it would be worse than spending a week with Vividus would be spending a week alone with Vividus. But as much as she wanted to argue, she needed to understand what was happening to Ben's body, and couldn't deny that as much as she hated the woman, she'd likely be able to learn things about life magic she never would otherwise. Why do you even have a meeting room? Thera asked as she took a seat while her aunt stood above her. We seem pretty out of the way for you to be having guests. I'll admit, there aren't many times I've needed to bring anyone to the polar region, but I find it's better to have it just in case. You mortals are so much more comfortable in these sorts of settings, so it makes things easier overall. Now tell me, how do you use your life magic? Mostly just general healing. In the last few months, I've been using it to strengthen different creatures, and I've also used it in attacks, either by disrupting a target's internal systems or overwhelming them with life mana. As much as she didn't want to cooperate out of spite, if she had no choice but to learn, she'd do it to the best of her abilities, and forced herself to keep a neutral tone as she spoke while Vividus nodded. As I expected, all of the more standard ways to use the magic, not that it's a problem, though you're still lacking any experience with the more interesting ways of applying it. Still, I really should test you on each of those options. Just one moment. Firing off a spell Thera couldn't begin to comprehend. In only a few moments a new creature made its way to them. About half her size, it walked on all fours with thick snow-white fur, 3 shining eyes and sharp teeth gleaming in its jaws, only separated by the knife held in its mouth her aunt took, and in one smooth motion slit its throat. You have less than a minute. Start healing it. Caught completely off guard by the act, she rushed over to the creature, placing her hands on it and paying no mind to whether it ended up charmed for the trouble as she ran her mana through it. She hadn't expected to use her magic so suddenly, and it showed as she forced more and more power into closing the wound, managing to succeed, but leaving a thick, ugly scar with how rushed it had been before Vividus reached down and touched the creature, fixing her mistake and leaving it in perfect condition. Unfazed, she pushed Thera to show off everything else she claimed she could do, empowering it as best as she could and injuring it with her life mana, all as her aunt nodded along, not saying more than she needed to until she gave her final assessment. You use your mana like a mortal. Of course I do, I am mortal. MMH, that might be part of the problem. You really don't think of yourself as a spirit, do you? I'd say it's pretty reasonable I don't. I'm fairly sure most spirits don't think of me as one either. Even if it was obvious she wasn't a pure succubus like her mother or aunt, those were the terms she thought of herself in first and foremost. She had a true physical body, more than just a mass of intelligent mana, and she was tied to the form she was born with. She aged, even if it all but stopped after reaching maturity, and even if she could expect a lifespan incomparable to other mortals, she would still die one day. More than that, culturally she was more similar to a succubus or many of the other hominid-type races than she could ever be to a spirit. As much as she liked the ones she'd interact with as she trained her spirit-empowering skill, it was clear they all had significantly different priorities to her and interests she could never truly appreciate. Again, maybe so, but it's holding you back. If all spirits didn't have their magics listed as their blessed skills, then it would undoubtedly be a passive one. Using a magic is as natural to our kind as breathing is to yours. The fact that you don't move the earth by instinct or heal with a thought is nothing but a weakness to you. Gee, thanks, Thera said sarcastically, waiting for something a bit more constructive as her aunt went on. More than that is the fact that you still clearly have issues with using your mana that other mortals just don't have. Don't glare, child, you know it to be true, and I'm not even referring to how your control fails when trying to restrain yourself. It's the opposite, actually. I never noticed it before, but you've never used a single spell that has used most of your mana pool, have you? Of course not. The amount I have is outrageous. Why would I ever need to? It's not that you don't need to, it's that you can't. While I watched you try to use your healing, at first you reached an upper limit for how much you could put out at once. It was still leagues above what a standard mortal could do, but if you start managing to go beyond that, you would likely be able to do things that can only be done at the high end of an awakened magic for most mortals, if not some spells that only the soul mages and I can usually pull off. As much as she hated it, that managed to properly pull her attention. Like what? Where to begin? Permanent strengthening beyond a mere buff, the sort of lifespan enhancements that only the soul mages can normally manage, chimera creation and homunculus creation along with everything in between, just to name a few. You might be able to manage bits of it now to a lesser extent, but that's nothing compared to how any spell would be if you could access your full mana pool and reach your true potential. Her aunt continued to drone on, but Thera's mind was fully captured by two words Vividus had said: lifespan enhancements. There were rumors that the soul mages were capable of such things, but to hear it so casually mentioned among the other topics like it was any other spell just showed how little it mattered to Vividus while it could mean the world to her. Her aunt and uncle, her mother, Ben. She told herself she wasn't going to think about the future where she'd one day lose them to time. There was nothing she could do, and worrying about that would only keep her from living in the moment. But things were different if she could exert some real form of control in keeping them all alive even a little longer. In that moment, she didn't need to push her hatred of her aunt from her mind. All she cared about was what she might be able to learn from her as the lessons began, and she put her all into it. Man, I might actually finish everything here at this rate. Being left alone in a library for so many hours, he'd spent the time plowing through books, enjoying the experience all the more for just how peaceful it was. He hadn't been able to do anything like that in the trial, and it felt like an excellent change of pace as he used the time to escape the world. Vividus's library wasn't just full of books on life magic like he'd expected when he got there, but a healthy range of topics that left him feeling happily stimulated as he got to work going through them all, reading dozens of thick texts in the span of the day thanks to all of his mind skills working together to make it easy. And if this keeps up, I might actually get to the point where I could just pick up a book and flip through the pages to read it all. Definitely need to get a few more levels to speed reading just for that. All the while as he read away, he'd been kneading a piece of metal in his hand that he kept in his pocket, altering through training every magic he had with it to pass the time, changing its shape with his material user skill, applying numerous complex enchantments with his divine enchanting, and destroying them in the end with his destruction, only to repeat the cycle in an attempt to grow. As he finished his last book, he put it to the side to give his magics more attention than what he could from a meager 2 minds, switching the order in his head to leave only a couple to digest everything he'd been reading while the rest focused on the lump in front of him. At the 4th level in Material User, there were things he wanted to try, especially after how much his mana pool had grown. Rolling the ball into a sphere, he attempted something he'd done when he first started using the skill, seeing how well he could manipulate it through mana alone. He stared at its shiny surface as it sat comfortably in his palm as he directed his mana through it, bending the metal to his will as he went, working in the simpler features first, stretching it out into a more oval shape, pulling bits out and pushing others in to get the beginning of the standard facial features he wanted to work with, eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, and clear, if a little rough, as he worked to refine them, giving more and more detail as he went before changing the scale he was working at, adding the pores as best as he could, subtle wrinkling around the eyes, slight dimples at the smile, and attempting the hardest of all, hair. That was the step where he failed. No matter how much he tried to pull out delicate strands from the head of the small bust he made, it was all too thick, giving a terrible look that Ben eventually gave up on, smoothing it all back out as he instead added more details and lines to give the look he wanted instead, reaching a point that he would consider it an excellent likeness of himself as he admired his handiwork. So my mana drains a lot faster doing it this way, but as long as I regulate how much I output to match my regen rates, it's not so bad. And I'm pretty sure unending crafting is enhancing the quality of my work too, cause otherwise I think this is better than really should be. It would make sense, right? I'm basically just using my magic as a tool for my crafting, and I already know the skills are related. Now it's just to test it in ways that my crafting won't help. He had 2 ideas that he wanted to try, one of which he'd tried before and basically failed at, while another was new to him, which he started with. Staring at his sculpture, there was one thing he was curious if he could manage: temperature control. How hot or cold something was depended on the energy in it, the atoms vibrating and giving off whatever levels of warmth they did, but then on a fundamental level that meant it was just the material moving, at least as far as he saw it. And if it's just the material moving, then I should be able to speed it up or stop it. Thinking about exactly what he'd need to do, he stopped and gave it a try, doing his best to still the atoms that made it up to bring down the temperature, feeling his mana leave him in a flood and sweat begin to form on him as he focused, putting everything he had to the task and still failing. He wasn't discouraged. He thought that if he was going to manage it all, it would be difficult and failure was always the likely outcome, at least at his current level, but he didn't let that stop him from trying it from the opposite end, doing his best to heat it after his mana regeneration. On that end, he thought he might have had the smallest amount of success once he tried. He thought it felt warmer in his hand, at least slightly, but the longer he focused on it, trying to raise the temperature even more, the more he had to admit to himself it was probably just the metal absorbing his own body heat. Alright, a failure on that end. Not the most unexpected thing in the world. A shame. If I could get that down, then I might have been able to cook food even without a fire or stove. Any change is just the result of the heat altering the food's properties, right? If my skill is ever great enough, I might be able to. But even then, it's probably a while away. Another thing to try in the future, but to end it, he focused on his final attempt, the first way he ever used his magic and deemed it to be wrong. He raised up the small bust into the air through mana alone and had it fly in a tight circle before immediately stopping, feeling his mana plummet from the act and needing to wait as it all regenerated. Okay, even with all of my levels, that's still absolutely outside of what's possible for me. Good to know now to just see if there's a way around it. When he used his magic, his mana wanted to completely fill whatever he was using it on, but he'd already confirmed back in the trial that it didn't have to, and instead he tried to focus it into the smallest area he could before trying again, using a fraction of it in the process as he lifted the sculpture from a single point instead of every bit at once and making it do slow circles in the air around the room, with a mana cost that meant he could do it constantly. He immediately wanted to cheer as the level went up. It still wasn't at the point where he could use it for an attack. Trying to move it fast enough for such a thing was all but begging to fall into mana exhaustion. But it did give him a new way to train the skill to practice, pushing it to grow to be stronger for the applications that had the most meaning to him, using it with his crafting. And when I get home, I can test a few more things too. So much to do, but it's all worth it. The only thing that stopped him from continuing to watch his sculpture flying through the air was Thera and Vividus walking in, both of them giving it a confused look before it landed back in his hand and he cleared his throat. Ahem. So how am I looking then, Doc? He asked, knowing full well that as he'd been both practicing and playing around in the last few hours, the room had been filled with life spirits examining him. Even if he didn't see them. We still need to look at you for longer, and there's something I personally want to check. Take your shirt off and use the tool you made that raised your level last time, so I can examine you. Wait, are you crazy? Thera yelled. He almost got himself killed using it last time, and we don't want to raise his level even more when we don't know what effect it has. If you want the best chance of understanding it, then it's important to see how it changes with a level up, and it would be even better for me to be watching as it happens rather than seeing it after. Given the nature of the skill, I don't believe it will harm him, and considering the skills that merged with it, he's likely to level it up in the event he gets enough injuries or needs to push beyond his limits, unless of course you don't think either of those things will happen again. Thera looked at Ben silently for a second, needing barely any time to give in to the face of her aunt's argument. Given his track record with injuries as well as life-and-death situations, she didn't want to bet on him finding himself to be safer overall anytime soon. Fine, but don't let him get past one level. With the both of them seeming to have come to an agreement about his body, Ben did as he was told, reaching into his bag to pull out the knife he'd used with the soul crystal still inside of it, and after Vividus stuck her hands into his chest and a second of hesitation on his part, activated the enchantment. As soon as it activated and scales started to form along his arm, the great life spirit removed one of her hands from him, ripping out multiple of the red growths in quick succession. Ow! Man, that really freaking hurts. It will be good to see what sort of effect it leaves behind after you undo it. I suppose I should also deal with your arm as a whole so it doesn't attempt anything, she said as an afterthought, the immediate consequence being Ben losing most feeling in it. He still had the strength to hang onto the knife and could run his mana through it, though there was a chance he didn't need to. He wasn't sure if he'd lost control of it yet, and on a whim decided to test something just to see what would happen. Taking extra care not to have the effects extend to Vividus in any way for the sake of his own safety, he activated Connect, trying to force the effects of the skill onto both his arm and the blade itself to see if either would work as his mind was filled with primal, raw screams. It wasn't his own, he hadn't been affected by the act. What he was experiencing was the rage and madness of the demon's soul. The effect of caging a beast that wanted to be a force of violence and letting it see that its only way out was by going through him. The notification rang out in his head, but before he could say anything about it, Vividus was already aware and ripped the knife from his grasp as the effects on him faded. The places where the scales were ripped out, leaving thin cuts in his flesh in their place. Just saying, it would be very cool if Connect decided to awaken right now too. I just did something real neat with the skill, didn't I? Using it on a soul that was trying to possess me. Come on. I've earned it. Despite his hopes though, no more system notifications followed. It was just Vividus standing there, arms still inside of him as she looked at him with what he thought was curiosity before changing her focus to the scales in her hand that hadn't reverted to bits of flesh. Well, you've certainly given me plenty to go over, so I'll be talking with the lesser spirits. You both take a room. The building is set up the same as the other one, so you should have no problem finding the equivalent of the last one. I'll call for you in the morning. Clearly dismissed, the great life spirit continued to stare at the scales as they both left, the two of them eager to relax for the night. As they got to their room and laid down, they briefly spoke about their days before Ben went to jot ideas down into a notebook for different enchantments to pass the time before going to sleep, only stopping as he felt Thera's eyes on him. Something on your mind? MMH, even my family tends to struggle to tell where I'm looking with eyes like this. What can I say? I'm a fantastic boyfriend. Also, that wasn't really an answer. She hesitated for a second, subtle looks of curiosity and concern playing across her face before she gave voice to what she wanted to know. I've never really asked you about it before. I know it's a sensitive subject for you, Ben, but what do your people think of death? He thought he understood where this was coming from. Even if he didn't like it, he did end up in danger a lot and assumed this was another extension of her concern for him. With whatever was happening to his body, it wouldn't be unreasonable to worry a bit. He probably should have been more concerned than he was, and he put an arm around her as he spoke. I mean, even if Earth was smaller than this world, it had a lot of history to it and more cultures and beliefs than I could name. I can't really say what my species believes as a whole, but I can say that I don't plan on just rolling over and dying if I can help it. So would you want to live as long as you can? She pressed, staring into his eyes as if to see his soul. Yeah, of course, Thera. Do I give the impression that I want to get off this ride so soon? I did watch you hang from the neck of a sea monster before. Ignore that. I like living. If the world doesn't end in the next few years, then I'll be happy to enjoy even more of it too. There's an entire planet to see after all, and I want to see as much of it as I can with you. As he said that, she leaned in and kissed him before going to rest her head on his chest, saying one final thing before she fell asleep. I want you to live a long life too. Out amongst the snow, the great life spirit hovered in the air, watching the battle going on beneath her as Abras's child faced off against the beasts she'd created for the coming conflict. A small horde of creatures, any one of them built to tower above Thera with teeth and claws fit for killing and not much else. They were meant to be predators in their purest forms and better than any plain homunculus could be, due to the second's limited nature and functions. Instead, they were her first attempt to create a chimera that used a homunculus as a base. Horribly outdated compared to what she was currently making, which meant they were disposable and fit for Thera's training, but still more dangerous than most things that undirected nature could produce due to the fact that they had all the danger that could be put into an artificially created life form, while at the same time all the benefits that were gained by an ensouled creature, able to make decisions on its own without constant input. They were violent by their very design, yet still collapsed to the ground one by one in the face of Thera's magic while Vividus evaluated from above. Better but not good, she thought as she watched the display, seeing it fail to meet her standards. If she could use more of her mana at once, then she could have dealt with them all after a single attack. This is barely less of a disappointment than training her as a child. Still, Thera was a potentially powerful tool in the coming war and was already obviously more dangerous than some of her earlier attempts at living weapons, so she would be worth trying to raise up more in the short time they had. The issue was that it was already coming to an end. After a week of stalling, acting as if she didn't have the answers they sought from the moment she first looked at her niece's companion, the time limit she'd given was ending tomorrow, nowhere near enough to get her anywhere near the level Vividus hoped for, not unless something drastic occurred. Maybe I could spend one of my better creatures, but then it's a matter of sufficiently motivating her. But that was a decision for later. As she watched all of her early prototypes be finished off by the life magic her niece wielded, she quickly called the girl inside to her workshop, seeing just how well she'd do at the other spells she'd been spending the last few days training in. Still really not a fan of this, Thera said as she finished up her practice with homunculus creation to move on to focusing on chimeras. I can't see any time I'd actually put this to use. That's because you lack imagination, Vividus chided. It's much more efficient to just have different beasts fight for you while you focus on more important things, or at least use them for support in your case. Besides, by every reasonable view, the boy you've brought is one. And an incredible one at that. The effects of the system on the sapient races really couldn't be understated. When she'd adapted the demon organs to him before, it was through her knowledge of how to produce chimeras that made it so easy and effective for her. But unlike any other time she'd made them with whatever dumb beasts were at her disposal, that was where the effect ended. She'd never had any reason to do it to a mortal before. She could see potential benefits to the act, but it would upset too many people on the world to make it worthwhile, at least until she'd gotten to see the system helping it grow beyond those initial changes to reach something greater. I can apply it to my own work to an extent, of course, but I'm not sure if I can replicate it on the same level without spending unreasonable levels of mana. The obvious choice would be to immediately start finding volunteers and grafting bits into them to see if they gain access to any similar jobs to the kin one they mentioned. It would also be good to confirm if this is the effect of creating a chimera with a sapient creature as a whole, or if this is only possible because the parts came from a demon. A race designed to adapt and grow, they would be unusually suited to keep changing even when applied to another organism. But if that's the case, then there's still one or two more tasteful options I could take advantage of on this world to try. There was so much to do and so little time, and she was wasting it watching her niece fail at the simple project she'd given her of grafting the wings of a bird to a reptile. She'd gotten to the point that they were attached and could even move, but the creature would never fly. For that, more modifications would be necessary, and it required a level of finesse that Vividus doubted Thera could pull off with her current skill. So once she judged the girl was done, she walked to it, giving it a slightly deeper look before moving on to her next topic. Better, but still far from the point where it could actually fly. If you can't do this, then you'll never be able to do it with creatures that would prove far more useful. And I don't want to. Look, I'm thankful for the lesson on the topic and the chance to practice it, but I'm not setting up a place in my home to cut animals apart and put them back together. A poor decision based on meaningless mortal values. But fine, let's move on to your true interest. It was the only one that Thera showed any enthusiasm for while also being the one Vividus had to pay the closest attention to, but she could at least admit that in that case her niece had been doing a reasonable job. Lifespan enhancement, a means of using life magic to reduce the effects of aging, potentially to a significant degree. While it couldn't be stopped altogether, if a person had enough skill and mana it could add decades to the life a person typically expected, and that was only when one considered the amount of mana a typical soul mage had. If Thera ever made it to the higher end of an awakened life magic, she might be able to manage much, much more. At first, Vividus hadn't understood the girl's interest in the subject. It was no secret among the great spirits that they expected she'd live exceptionally long for a mortal, even if it would be nothing but a blip in the lifespans they'd already had and could still expect in the years to come. But she was at least marginally aware of the fact that Thera didn't seem thrilled with that knowledge the way other mortals might have been. The reason for her niece's sudden interest only came to her as she saw Thera looking at the boy, the air filling with pheromones to an even greater extent than what she'd dealt with in Stonewall that neither could consciously notice was there, even if it seemed to be such a central part to succubus biology. Thera was less interested in any application of the spell for herself than for those in her life, a weakness shared by many of the soul mages she'd met in the past as well, but an exploitable one. She did believe Thera was taking her lessons seriously. The issue just lied in that she wasn't properly motivated to go beyond her limits, and Vividus had just formed a perfect idea on how to change that. If Thera failed, then it would only cost the Great Spirit an interesting subject, and she already knew how he'd been made. If there was a need then to examine something like him in the future, then she could simply produce more.